Your feet find the floor, and the packed dirt is smooth and cold against your soles, worn hard by generations of footsteps until it feels almost like stone. You stand slowly, the way you always do, letting your body remember its balance in the dark, and you reach for the wooden peg where your dress hangs. The wool is rough and smells of outdoor things, of grass and road dust and the faint animal warmth of the geese you tend, and you pull it over your head with the practiced motion of someone who has done this every morning for years. The sleeves settle around your wrists, and you lace the front with fingers still clumsy from sleep, working the leather cord through the eyelets one by one, tugging each loop snug but not tight. Your shawl comes next, a heavier square of brown wool that you fold into a triangle and drape over your shoulders, crossing the ends over your chest and tucking them into the belt you tie around your waist. The belt is a simple strip of leather with a brass buckle gone dark with age, and you run your thumb over its familiar curve before reaching for your clogs. The clogs sit by the door, hollowed from all the wood, their surfaces polished to a dull sheen by use. You step into them and feel the wood cradle your heels, the arch of each sole worn to the shape of your foot. The leather strap across the instep has softened over time, and you buckle it without looking, your fingers knowing exactly where the hole should be. You stand for a moment in the dark cottage, listening to the silence, and then you move toward the shelf where the food is kept. The shelf is a single plank of pine, its edge rounded by wear, and on it rests a loaf of dark bread wrapped in a linen cloth and a wedge of hard cheese, the color of old ivory. You break off a heel of the bread, feeling the crust resist, and then crackle under your thumb, and you wrap it in a corner of the cloth you keep for this purpose. The cheese you cut with a small knife that hangs from your belt, sawing gently until a piece comes away, and you fold it beside the bread. There is a clay cup on the shelf too, and you dip it into the water bucket by the door, drinking slowly, feeling the water move down your throat in a cool line. The bucket makes a hollow wooden sound when you set the cup back, and the water inside sloshes once and then stills. You turn to the hearth. The fire has sunk to embers, a low red pulse barely visible under a blanket of ash, and you kneel to blow on it gently. The ash lifts in a fine grey cloud, and the embers brighten to orange, enough to light the small tallow candle you keep on the stone ledge. The flame catches with a thin blue flicker before steadying to yellow, and it throws a soft circle of light that wobbles on the walls. You hold the candle up and look around the cottage one last time. The two stools by the hearth, the iron pot hanging from its hook, the bundle of dried herbs suspended from a rafter, the window opening that is still shuttered against the night. Everything is in its place as it was yesterday, as it will be tomorrow. You set the candle back on the ledge and move to the door, lifting the wooden latch with both hands. The latch is heavy and makes a grinding sound as it slides back, and the door swings inward on leather hinges that creak in a way you have known all your life. Cold air spills over the threshold, fresher than the air inside, smelling of wet grass and turned earth, and the faint mineral scent of the stream beyond the village. You step out and pull the door closed behind you, and the latch falls back into place with a soft thud. The sky above the village is the color of pewter, lightening at the eastern edge where the sun is still below the horizon, but beginning to push its influence upward. A few last stars hang in the west like specks of bone, and you can make out the shapes of the other cottages clustered along the lane, their thatched roofs sagging comfortably, their walls of wattle and daub pale in the half-light. No one else is stirring. The only movement is a thread of smoke rising from one chimney further down the row, a thin grey line that climbs straight up before the breeze catches it and smudges it away. You stand for a moment in the lane, your clogs settling into the dust, feeling the cold seep through the wood into your feet, and you breathe out a cloud of steam that hangs for a second before vanishing. The geese are penned behind the cottage, and you walk around the building along the narrow path beaten into the weeds by your own daily passing. The path runs between the cottage wall and a low hedge of hazel, and your shoulder brushes the plaster as you go, leaving a faint white smear on your shawl that you will notice later. The pen comes into view, a circle of wattle fencing about waist-high, and inside it the geese are stirring. You hear them before you see them, a low gabbling murmur that rises and falls without pattern, punctuated by the occasional soft hiss of one bird warning another away from a favoured spot. The sound is as familiar to you as the sound of your own breathing, and you let it wash over you as you approach the gate. The gate is a panel of woven withies lashed to a frame of poles, and it lifts rather than swings, hooked to the fence posts with loops of rope. You work the loops free one at a time, the rope rough against your cold fingers, and you lean the gate against the outside of the pen. The geese notice the opening immediately, and their murmur changes pitch, becoming higher and busier, a sound of anticipation. The old gander comes forward first, his orange bill catching the dim light, his neck extended and his head tilting to fix you with one amber eye. He makes a sound low in his throat, not quite a hiss and not quite a honk, a sound that means he knows you and accepts your presence but does not entirely trust it. You step back to give him room, and he walks through the gate with a rolling gait, his legs set wide, his orange feet slapping the dust in a steady rhythm. The other geese follow, a river of white and grey-brown feathers pouring through the narrow opening in no particular order. You count them aloud, speaking the numbers into the cold air as each bird passes. 1, 2, 3. The sound of your voice low and rhythmic. 4, 5, 6. A rise and fall like a lullaby you half remember. The birds jostle one another, their wings brushing, their necks weaving. But there is no real aggression in it, just the usual small disputes of creatures who live together. 7, 8, 9. A young goose, still mostly grey in its feathers, stops in the gateway and looks around as if confused, and the bird behind it gives an impatient peck at its tail until it moves on. 10, 11, 12. The last bird through is an old female with a warm spot on her back, where the feathers have thinned, and she walks more slowly than the others, her feet making a softer sound on the ground. 13. 13 geese, all accounted for, and you let out a breath you did not realize you had been holding. The flock bunches together in the lane, a mass of white bodies shifting and settling, and you pull the gate back into place behind the last bird, though there is no need to secure it now. You pick up the hazel switch from its resting place against the fence, a straight wand about the length of your arm, its bark worn smooth at the grip, its tip still flexible and green. You do not use it to strike the birds. It is simply an extension of your arm. A guide, a signal, something to tap the ground with or to hold out as a barrier when a goose tries to wander. The weight of it in your hand is a comfort, as familiar as the clogs on your feet. The track that runs past the cottage is called a road by the people who live here, though it is really just a broad ribbon of earth packed hard by years of feet and hooves and cartwheels. It runs east toward the market town, and you turn that way now, facing the pale promise of dawn. The geese, understanding the turn without being told, begin to walk ahead of you, their bodies swaying side to side, their necks bobbing with each step. The ruts in the track are deep here, carved by the wheels of heavy carts when the autumn rains turn the ground to mud, and then baked hard by the sun, and then carved again, so that the road resembles 3 parallel channels separated by ridges of packed earth. You walk in the middle rut because it is the shallowest, and the geese spread out across all 3, some walking in the wheel tracks and some on the ridges, finding their own paths. The light is growing now, the grey sky bleaching toward a pale bone white, and the shapes of the fields on either side of the track become visible. They are fallow fields, resting this year, covered with a tangle of dried weeds and short grass, and in the half-light they look soft and textured like old velvet. A low mist hangs over the lowest part of the field to your right, a white blanket that comes up to your waist if you were to walk into it, and the tops of the taller weeds poke through like the masts of ships in a harbour. You have never seen a ship or a harbour, but you have heard them described by a travelling peddler who once stayed the night in your uncle's cottage, and the image has stayed with you. The sound of the geese fills the silence. Their feet make a soft slapping noise on the packed earth, a sound like rain on a roof but slower and more irregular. Their voices rise and fall in a constant low gabble, a conversation you cannot understand but whose tones you know by heart: contentment, mild complaint, the announcement of a found morsel, the grumble of a bird who has been jostled. Occasionally a goose stretches its wings, the feathers making a dry rustling sound like parchment being folded, and then settles them back with a little shake. The old gander at the front stops periodically to look around, his long neck rising straight up, his head turning from side to side in a slow arc. And then he moves on, satisfied. Your own footsteps add another layer to the sound, the wooden clop of your clogs, a steady two-beat rhythm that forms a ground bass beneath the higher notes of the geese. Left clog, right clog, left clog, right clog, a sound that has been the same for all the mornings you can remember. The switch in your hand taps your ankle now and then. As you walk, a light touch that you notice only when it happens, and you switch the wand to your other hand to even the feeling. The air is cold on your cheeks and the tip of your nose, but the walking is beginning to warm you. A gentle heat starting deep in your muscles and spreading outward, and you loosen your shawl slightly to let the warmth escape. Ahead of you, the track bends slightly to the left around a clump of alder trees, their bare branches making a dark lace against the brightening sky, and then straightens again, running due east. You can see perhaps half a mile before the track dips into a hollow and disappears, and in all that distance there is nothing moving except you and the geese. The ceasefire holds, and the land is quiet, and the road belongs to you alone this morning. You pass the first milestone, a rough pillar of grey stone set into the verge, its top worn to a smooth dome, its sides covered with a crust of pale lichen. Someone long ago chiseled a number into the stone, but the lichen has grown over it, and no one now remembers what it said. You touch the cold stone with your fingertips as you pass, a habit you cannot break, and you feel the rough texture of the lichen like dried sponge. The geese have found a patch of chickweed growing at the edge of the track, and they slow to nibble at it, their bills working delicately, plucking the small green leaves with surprising precision. You let them pause, standing with your switch held loosely at your side, your weight shifted onto one hip. The sun has still not risen above the horizon, but the light is full now, a cool, clear light that shows every detail of the world. The veins on the chickweed leaves, the grain of the wood on your clogs, the individual barbs of the feathers on the nearest goose. The bird is close enough to touch, and you can see the way the white feathers overlap, like tiles on a roof, each one smooth and slightly oily to the touch, a waterproof coating that makes water bead and roll away. The goose glances at you with one bright eye, makes a low sound of acknowledgement, and returns to its foraging. You count the flock again while they eat, pointing your finger at each bird and murmuring the numbers, and they are all there, all 13. Their white bodies scattered along the verge like fallen patches of snow. The mist in the low field is beginning to dissolve, the white blanket thinning to a gauze and then to nothing, and the field reveals itself as a flat expanse of brown-grey earth dotted with the dried stalks of last year's barley. A single crow flaps across the field, flying low and straight, and you watch it until it vanishes into the alder copse. The sound of its wings is a soft, rhythmic wafting that fades and then is gone. The old gander lifts his head and honks once, a loud call that cuts through the murmur of the flock, and as if by agreement the other geese lift their heads too and begin to drift back onto the track. You push off the milestone with your hip and resume walking, the switch tapping your ankle, the clogs clopping on the packed earth. The sun pushes its first edge above the horizon, a sliver of pale gold that flattens across the fields and makes the goose feathers glow pink for just a moment before the light shifts and they are white again. The day has begun, and there is a long road ahead, and you walk on into the quiet morning with your flock moving around you like a slow white river. The gate of the pen waits where you left it, leaning against the wattle fence with its loops of rope trailing in the dust like thin brown snakes. You stand beside it in the lane, the packed earth cool under your clogs, and you watch the geese arrange themselves into the shape of departure. They have known this moment every morning of their lives, and yet they approach it each time as if it were new, pausing to consider the gap in the fence with their heads tilted and their amber eyes blinking slowly in the pale light. The oldest in Moster is already through, his large orange feet planted firmly on the track beyond, and he turns his head on its long flexible neck to look back at the others with an expression that seems to hold both patience and a mild reproach. The sound coming from the pen is a low, continuous gabble, a rolling murmur of small honks and soft, throaty trills that rises and falls without any obvious pattern, like water moving over stones, and it fills the morning air with a sense of busy contentment. The young grey goose hesitates at the threshold, one foot lifted and held motionless just above the packed earth, and for a long moment it stays frozen in that pose as if it has forgotten what it meant to do. The bird behind it, a plump female with a smudge of mud on her breast, gives an impatient nudge with her bill, a quick light peck at the grey tail feathers, and the young goose startles forward through the gate with a small flurry of wings that makes a dry rustling sound like old parchment being shaken out. You smile without moving your face, a warmth that stays behind your eyes, and you shift your weight from one clob to the other while you wait. The hazel switch rests in your right hand, held loosely between your thumb and forefinger, its tip just brushing the ground beside your ankle. It is still cool from the night air, its bark smooth and faintly green under your fingers, and you run your thumb along its length without thinking, feeling the tiny ridges where the leaves once attached. One by one the geese amble through the opening, their bodies rolling side to side with each step, their orange bills turning left and right as they survey the world beyond the pen. The bills are the brightest things in the morning, vivid slashes of color against the muted browns and grays of the lane, and they open and close with small clicking sounds as the birds taste the air and comment to one another in their own private language. You count them as they come, your lips moving with the numbers, the words barely audible even to yourself. 1, 2, 3, each bird a familiar shape you would recognize anywhere. 4, 5, 6, the ones with the slightly ruffled neck feathers, the ones with the slightly ruffled neck feathers, the ones with the darker patches on their wings. 7, 8, 9, the old female with the worn spot on her back, who walks more slowly than the rest. 10, 11, 12, and finally the last of Baraig Huchhalil Aqualil 13. All present, all accounted for, all moving now in the loose assemblage that is a flock on the verge of walking. You lift the gate from where it leans, the woven withies surprisingly light in your hands, and you fit it back into the gap in the fence. The loops of rope slip over the posts with a soft scraping sound, and you tug each one snug, working by feel, because your eyes are on the geese and the road ahead. The pen behind you is empty now, a circle of flattened straw and scattered droppings, and it will wait quietly all day until you return in the evening. The wattle walls throw long, thin shadows across the bare ground inside, and a single feather, small and white and downy, lifts on a breath of breeze and drifts across the pen before settling against the far fence. You turn your back on the empty pen and walk the few steps to where the geese are gathering on the track. The track here runs straight for a short distance before it bends around the alder copse, and in this stretch it is deeply rutted, the wheel channels carved by years of heavy carts grinding through mud that later dried into iron-hard ridges. The ruts are as deep as your hand is long in places, their sides steep and their bottoms filled with a fine brown dust that puffs up in little clouds when a goose steps into it. Last night there must have been a brief shower, because scattered along the ruts are puddles of clear rainwater, each one a perfect mirror of the brightening grey sky overhead. The puddles are no bigger than a spread hand, and they lie in the hollows of the wheel tracks like little windows into another world that is all silver and pearl. A goose steps delicately around one, its foot leaving a three-toed print in the damp edge of the dust, and the water in the puddle trembles once and then stills again, still holding the reflection of a passing cloud. You stand at the edge of the track, where the grass gives way to bare earth, and you shift the hazel switch to your left hand so you can brush a strand of hair away from your face. The morning air is cool and damp, carrying the smell of wet soil and the faint sweetness of something blooming unseen in the hedgerow. Your shawl has slipped a little on one shoulder, and you tug it back into place with a practiced motion, feeling the rough wool settle against your collarbone. The geese are still milling, still arranging themselves into the order they will keep for the first part of the walk, and this is a process you cannot hurry. They must find their own places, the gander always at the front, the older females just behind him, the younger birds and the restless ones scattered through the middle, and the old slow female bringing up the rear. It is a pattern they have worked out over many mornings, and you watch it take shape with the calm patience of someone who knows that the road will still be there when the geese are ready. The light is stronger now, the grey sky brightening to the colour of a dove's breast, and the shapes of things are becoming sharper. You can see the individual pebbles in the track, worn smooth and round like river stones, and the tiny cracks in the dried mud of the ridges, and the fine pale hairs on the stems of the weeds growing along the verge. The hazel switch in your hand casts a thin shadow that wavers on the ground, and you twirl it once idly, watching the shadow dance, and then stop. One of the geese, a young bird with a brownish smudge still lingering on its neck where the adult white has not fully grown in, stops at the edge of a puddle and dips its bill into the water. It drinks in quick little sips, tilting its head back after each one to let the water run down its long throat. And the movement is so precise and so familiar that you feel for a moment the deep, quiet happiness that comes from watching a creature do exactly what it was made to do. When the last goose has taken its place and the flock has settled into a loose formation that stretches from one side of the track to the other, you step out onto the road behind them. Your clogs make a soft wooden plop on the hard earth, a sound that echoes slightly off the wall of the cottage and then is swallowed by the open air. The geese hear the sound and understand it, and without any signal from you, the old gander begins to walk, his neck stretched forward, his orange feet lifting high and coming down with a gentle slap on the packed ground. The flock moves with him, a wave of white bodies parting around the puddles and the deepest ruts, and the noise they make changes, from the stationary gabble to a walking gabble, a sound that has a rhythm to it, a forward momentum, like the creak of a cartwheel, but softer and more alive. You fall into step behind them, leaving a gap of perhaps 6 paces between yourself and the last of the geese. This is the distance you always keep, close enough that you can guide them with the switch if necessary, far enough that they do not feel crowded. The hazel wand hangs from your hand, its tip bumping lightly against your ankle with every other step, a small steady tap that you feel through the leather of your clog strap. The sensation is so regular that it becomes a kind of echo to your own walking, a secondary pulse that marks the rhythm of the journey. Left clog, right clog, the switch taps. Left clog, right clog, the switch taps, and underneath that the constant soft slap of the geese's feet on the earth, a sound like rain on a roof but slower and more irregular. The ruts channel the flock into 3 loose lines. Some geese walk in the left wheel track, some in the right, and a few balance along the ridge of packed earth in the middle, their bodies swaying to keep their footing on the narrow strip. The ridge is crowned with a thin growth of wiry grass that has been flattened by the passage of many feet, and it gives slightly under the weight of the birds, springing back after they pass. You walk in the right wheel track because it is the shallower one here, your clogs fitting neatly into the groove as if it were made for you, and the dust that fills the bottom of the rut cushions your steps slightly, making the clop of the wood softer than it is on bare stone. The old gander stops suddenly, his head dropping low, and you see that he has found something on the road, a beetle, black and shiny, crawling slowly across the packed earth. The beetle is about the size of your thumbnail, its legs moving in a patient mechanical rhythm, and it seems unaware of the large orange bill that now hovers just above its back. The gander extends his neck and makes a low hissing sound, a single thin stream of air pushed through his bill, and the beetle, as if suddenly understanding its danger, freezes in place. The gander considers it for a long moment, his amber eye unblinking, and then he straightens up and walks on, leaving the beetle unharmed. You step carefully around the small black shape as you pass, your clog missing it by the width of a finger, and when you glance back a few moments later, the beetle is still there, still motionless, a tiny dark jewel on the dusty road. The cottage has dropped out of sight behind you now, hidden by the bend and the alder trees, and ahead you can see the track running straight for a long distance before it begins to climb toward the common. The light has lost its early greyness and become a clean, pale yellow, the colour of weak tea held up to a window, and the shadows that the geese cast are sharp-edged and short. A lark somewhere in the fields begins to sing, its notes falling down through the air like drops of water, and the sound makes the silence around it seem deeper rather than less. You walk on, the switch tapping its steady rhythm, the geese murmuring their endless conversation, and the morning opens ahead of you like a door swinging wide on quiet hinges. The track begins to rise so gradually that you do not notice the change at first, only that your legs feel slightly heavier and the sound of your clogs on the earth has shifted from a flat clop to a softer thud as the ground firms beneath the dust. The ruts grow shallower here, the ridges between them less pronounced, and the road straightens into a long, gentle incline that climbs toward a low crest where the sky seems wider and paler. The geese ahead of you adjust their pace without breaking rhythm, their orange feet pressing a little harder into the earth, their bodies tilting forward just enough to meet the slope. The old gander's neck stretches out parallel to the ground, and his waddle swings with each step like a small bell that makes no sound. The sound of the flock changes on the incline. the usual soft slapping of feet becoming a more deliberate patting, and the gabble drops in pitch as the birds conserve their breath for the climb. You walk on, the hazel switch now held across your palm, its tip pointing forward rather than down, and you feel the gentle burn of the slope in your calves. It is not a hard climb, just enough to remind you that you are moving over land that has shape and history, a rise that has been worn into the landscape by centuries of travelers walking to market with their own burdens. The half-mile mark is somewhere behind you now, passed without ceremony, somewhere between the last bend and the first hint of the incline, and ahead you can see the dark shape of the boundary oak beginning to resolve out of the pale morning haze. At first it is just a smudge, a brownish-grey blur against the brightening sky, but with every step it grows more distinct, taking on texture and mass until you can make out the curve of its crown and the thick column of its trunk. Everyone in the village calls it the boundary tree, though no one living can remember which boundary it once marked. The old people say it stood there before the war, before the last war, before anyone thought to draw lines on a map and call one patch of ground one thing and another patch something else. It is simply the oak, a landmark as permanent as the hills, and you have passed it so many times that its shape is stitched into the fabric of your memory. Yet it always looks slightly different each morning, depending on the light and the season and the weather. And today it appears both familiar and strange, its bare upper branches edged against a sky the color of watered milk, its lower limbs heavy with the darkness of night not yet wholly burned away. The lane rises toward it in a shallow curve, and as you draw closer the oak seems to grow at an unnatural rate, swelling from a distant feature into a presence that dominates the landscape. Its trunk is enormous, broader than the width of your outstretched arms, and it rises from a nest of exposed roots that spread across the ground like the ridges on the back of an ancient hand. The bark is deeply furrowed, cracked in places into dark fissures that run vertically from the ground to the first branches, and between these fissures the bark is smooth and grey-brown, the color of old leather left in the sun. Pale green lichen patches the trunk in irregular blotches, some no bigger than your thumbnail and others spreading as wide as a dinner plate, their surfaces crusty and dry-looking, the color of dried sage. Where the lichen meets the bark, there is a thin line of darker color, as if the tree has drawn a boundary of its own. One heavy limb dips low on the southern side of the trunk, curving downward before sweeping up again at its tip, and its lowest point hangs just above the ground, so that the leaves at its end brush the grass when the wind blows. Today there is no wind, and the limb hangs motionless, a solid arc of wood and twig and bud that you could touch by raising your hand. You have touched it many times, walking beneath it like passing under a gateway, and the wood there is polished smooth by the passage of bodies, both human and animal, that have brushed against it over the years. Above this low limb, the crown of the oak spreads wide and high, a tangled net of branches that cross and recross, some as thick as your thigh and others as slender as your little finger, all of them bearing the first small buds that will open into leaves in another month. The buds are tight and brown, shaped like teardrops, and they catch the morning light on their pointed tips. The geese, upon reaching the edge of the oak's shadow, slow their pace and then stop entirely, as they have done every morning you can remember. They do not need to be told. The tree exerts some pull on them, perhaps the promise of shade in summer or the memory of acorns in autumn, and they spread out around its base with a contented murmur, lowering their heads to peck at the coarse grass that grows between the roots. The grass here is different from the grass in the fields, tougher and darker green, with blades that feel rough if you run them through your fingers. It grows in tufts that have been cropped close by the geese on countless mornings, and today the birds work their bills through it with the same patient diligence, pulling at the blades and swallowing them with small jerks of their heads. You step off the track and onto the bare earth around the tree, your clogs sinking slightly into the layer of old leaves and husks that carpets the ground. The oak's roots rise out of the soil like the backs of buried animals, smooth and grey where feet have warmed them, rough and lichen-crusted where they are sheltered from touch. You pick your way among them until you reach the trunk, and then you turn and lean back against it, feeling the solid weight of the ancient wood press into your shoulder blades through the thickness of your shawl and dress. The bark is cool even through the wool, its ridges making an uneven surface that you shift slightly to accommodate, finding the hollows and knobs that fit the shape of your back. You have leaned against this tree so often that your body knows its contours without thought, and you settle into the position with a small sigh that you do not consciously release. The stillness under the oak is different from the stillness on the open road. It is a deeper quiet, a quiet with layers, made of the shade and the scent of old wood and the slight dampness that lingers in the soil, even on dry days. The air smells of earth and tannin, a faintly sharp and clean smell like the inside of a wooden chest, and underneath that there is the sweeter scent of the lichen, a dry mineral fragrance that reminds you of stone walls after rain. You lift your face toward the branches and see the last few stars fading in the western sky, tiny points of light that were bright when you left the cottage but are now thin and watery, dissolving one by one into the pale blue wash of the morning. You watch them go without sadness, merely noting their departure the way you note the position of the sun or the color of the clouds, a piece of information stored away and then released. The geese murmur at your feet, their voices a low, continuous burble that rises and falls without urgency. The old gander has found a patch of clover near one of the largest roots, and he pulls at it with a sideways tug of his bill, his eye half closed in contentment. A younger goose, the same grey-feathered one that hesitated at the gate, scratches at the soil with one orange foot, loosening something small that it snaps up before the others notice. The worn-backed female has settled herself into a hollow between two roots, her body nestled as neatly as an egg in a cup, and she tucks her bill under her wing with the air of someone who has decided that this stop will be a long one. You do not mind the pause. The market is not going anywhere, and the ceasefire means there is no need to hurry, no reason to push the flock faster than they want to go. You count the birds again, a habit that is as much for your own reassurance as it is for any practical purpose, and your eyes move from one white body to the next while your lips shake the numbers silently. 1 by the north root, 2 beside the low limb, 3 and 4 in the grass near the track, 5 and 6 pecking at the same patch of clover, 7 resting in the hollow, 8 and 9 near the trunk itself, 10 and 11 wandering toward the far side of the tree, 12 and 13 close together near your feet. 13 geese, all accounted for, all safe and occupied. You let the count settle in your mind, and you close your eyes for a moment, feeling the oak at your back and the cool air on your face and the soft ground under your clogs. When you open your eyes again, a crow is lifting from the hedgerow that runs along the far side of the track. It rises slowly, its wings beating with a lazy rhythm that seems to take no effort at all, each stroke carrying it a little higher until it clears the top of the hedge and angles out over the field beyond. Its feathers are black, but not entirely black, catching a gleam of purple-green iridescence along the edges as it banks into the light, and its call comes once, a rough caw that hangs in the air for a moment before fading. The crow flaps across your field of view from left to right, moving parallel to the hedgerow, and then it drops out of sight behind a rise in the field, and the sky is empty again. You watch the spot where it vanished for a few seconds longer, as if expecting it to reappear, but it does not, and you let your gaze fall back to the geese. The light has changed while you have been standing here. The pale yellow of early morning has deepened toward a warmer tone, the color of fresh butter rather than weak tea, and the shadows beneath the geese have grown sharper and smaller. The sun is fully up now, though still low, and its light slants through the branches of the oak in long golden shafts that dapple the ground with coins of brightness. The stars are all gone, the last one having blinked out while you were watching the crow, and the sky is a clean pale blue from horizon to horizon. A small breeze stirs for the first time this morning, just enough to move the tips of the grass and to rustle the dried leaves still clinging to the oak's lower branches, and the sound is a soft papery whisper that blends with the murmur of the geese. You realize that your hands have been resting motionless against your apron, and you flex your fingers to stir the blood back into them. The hazel switch is still tucked under your arm where you placed it when you leaned against the trunk, and you retrieve it now, running your thumb over its familiar smooth length. It is time to move on, and the geese, as if attuned to the shift in your thoughts, begin to stir. The old gander lifts his head and looks at you, his amber eye bright and alert, and he makes a low sound in his throat that is not quite a honk but carries the same meaning. The worn-backed female rises from her hollow with a shake of her feathers, and the young grey goose stops scratching at the soil and waddles toward the track. You push yourself away from the yoke with a gentle thrust of your hip, feeling the bark's ridges drag once across your shawl before you are upright and standing on your own. The place on your back where the tree was is cool now, and you adjust your shawl to cover it, pulling the wool snug across your shoulders. You raise the hazel switch slightly and point it toward the road, and you cluck your tongue against the roof of your mouth, a soft clicking sound that the geese know as well as they know the shape of your shadow. The gander steps forward onto the track, his feet slapping the packed earth with renewed purpose, and the rest of the flock funnels in behind him, their bodies weaving together into a single moving shape. You take your place at the rear, the switch tapping your ankle once as you fall into rhythm, and the boundary oak begins its slow retreat behind you, growing smaller with each step until it is once again just a dark shape on the crest of the low hill, standing silent and patient, waiting for your return. Beyond the oak, the land opens as if a door has swung wide, the close horizon of hedgerows and cottage walls falling away to reveal a broad stretch of common that rolls toward the sky in gentle undulations. The track, which until now has been a defined road with deep ruts and grassy banks, begins to fray at its edges, unraveling into two faint sandy lines that run parallel across the open ground with a raised strip of turf between them. The earth here is poorer, a pale grey-brown mixed with small stones and coarse sand that grates softly under your clogs with a sound like a millstone turning far away. You step over the invisible boundary where the cultivated land ends and the common begins, and the change is immediate in every sense. The air smells different, drier and sharper with a hint of something herbal. The ground feels looser underfoot, and the sounds of the world seem to spread out and thin until they are no longer contained by walls and hedges, but released into a wide bowl of silence. The geese respond to the openness by fanning out across the track and onto the common itself, their white bodies scattering like seeds thrown from a sower's hand. They no longer walk in a loose line but spread into a broad front, some still following the sandy wheel tracks, while others veer off to investigate clumps of vegetation that dot the landscape. The old gander stays near the center of the track, his neck rising and falling with each step, but the younger birds wander farther, testing the limits of your patience and finding that today the limits are generous. You let them roam, the hazel switch hanging loose at your side, because the common is a safe place with no hidden ditches or sudden drops, just mile after mile of gently rolling ground covered in a tapestry of low plants that have grown here for centuries without anyone planting or tending them. The heather is the first thing you notice, not as individual plants at first, but as a color that washes across the land in broad drifts. It is not yet in flower, the small bell-shaped blooms still tight buds waiting for the warmer months, but the stems themselves hold a muted purple-brown hue that deepens in the hollows and fades to a silvery grey on the rises. The heather grows in dense mats that look soft from a distance, like a thick carpet laid over the contours of the ground, and when a goose steps into a patch of it, the stems spring back slowly after the bird passes, leaving a faint trail that closes within moments. Where the heather thins, the ground reveals itself as a mosaic of pale sand and dark pebbles and patches of grey-green lichen that crackle underfoot if you step on them, releasing a dry, earthy scent like old wood smoke. You walk with your head slightly bowed, watching the heather stems brush against your clogs, and you notice the tiny leaves that cling to them, scale-like and overlapping, each one no bigger than a grain of barley. The geese nibble at the freshest shoots, snipping them off with quick, precise movements of their bills, and the sound of it is a soft, continuous snipping that blends with the rustle of their feet through the vegetation. Scattered among the heather are islands of gorse, low bushy plants with dark green spines that form dense thickets shaped by the prevailing wind into hunched asymmetrical forms. The gorse is in bloom even now, a few brave yellow flowers opening despite the cool air, and their color is so bright against the muted heather that they seem to glow from within, like small flames caught in the branches. The flowers smell of coconut and vanilla, a sweetness that drifts across the common in faint waves when the breeze shifts, and you breathe it in without thinking, the scent lodging somewhere deep in your memory where it will stay for years. A bee moves among the gorse blossoms, its body heavy and dark gold, its buzz a low thrumming note that rises and falls as it moves from flower to flower with a diligence that seems almost solemn. You pause for a moment to watch it, the bee's legs already packed with bright orange pollen. And then you walk on, leaving it to its work. The sun has now climbed high enough to cast a pale warmth that you feel first on the back of your neck and then, as the angle shifts, across your shoulders. It appears through a thin veil of high cloud as a disk of soft white light, its edges blurred so that it seems to melt into the surrounding sky rather than standing apart from it. This filtered sunlight lacks the sharpness of a clear day, and the shadows it casts are faint, mere suggestions of darkness that pool under the gorse bushes and ripple across the uneven ground without any hard edges. Your shawl, which was a necessity in the early chill, now feels almost too warm, and you loosen it slightly, letting the air move across your collarbone in a small, cool current that comes and goes with the breeze. The geese, with their dense layers of feathers, seem unbothered by the temperature, their bodies radiating a steady animal warmth that you can feel if you stand close enough to one of them. The road, such as it is, continues forward as two sandy tracks separated by a grassy ridge that rises to the height of your ankle. The ridge is covered with fine-bladed grass that has been cropped short by rabbits and sheep and the occasional passing flock, and it makes a soft green line that cuts through the browns and purples of the heather like a vein of different stone in a quarry wall. You walk in the left-wheeled track because it is the smoother of the two, the sand packed firm by the passage of carts that have not come this way in weeks, and your clogs leave shallow impressions that fill with loose sand as soon as you lift your foot. The right wheel track runs parallel, about the width of a cart axle away, and sometimes a goose wanders into it and walks along in the groove as if it were a path made especially for birds, its orange feet leaving three-toed prints that overlap and blur into a continuous chain. The rhythm of your walking has become so steady that you are hardly aware of it anymore, your body moving with the automatic ease of long practice. Left clog, right clog, left clog, right clog. The sound softer here on the sand than it was on the packed earth of the lane, more of a shuffle than a clop. The hazel switch swings gently from your right hand, its tip describing small arcs in the air, and every so often it brushes against the heather stems and makes a faint swishing sound that blends with the wind. You shift the switch to your left hand for a while, evening out the feeling, and then shift it back again when your right hand begins to feel empty. The motion is thoughtless, part of the larger rhythm that carries you forward through the morning. The geese have spread themselves across a wide area now, some foraging in the heather to the left of the track, some investigating the gorse thickets to the right, and a core group still walking more or less along the grassy ridge in the middle. Their constant soft gabbling is the only voice in the landscape, a low, muttering conversation that has no beginning and no end, just a continuous stream of small sounds that rise and fall in volume as the breeze carries them toward you or away. Occasionally a single goose lifts its head and makes a louder call, a honk that carries across the common and hangs in the air for a long moment before fading, and then another goose answers from somewhere farther off, and the exchange is like two bells tolling in distant villages, each sound complete in itself and needing no reply. You listen to these calls without counting them, letting them wash over you the way you let the sunlight and the breeze wash over you, as elements of the journey that require no action. The common offers no landmarks to measure your progress, no milestones or boundary oaks or wayside shrines, only the slow change in the texture of the vegetation as you move across it. A patch of heather gives way to a stretch of fine grass dotted with the tiny yellow flowers of tormentil, their four petals opening flat to the pale sun, and then the grass gives way to an area of bare sand where rabbit droppings lie scattered like dark seeds, and the only plants are small tough succulents with fleshy leaves that glisten with a silvery coating. The geese pause in these bare patches to take dust baths, squatting down and wriggling their bodies into the sand, fluffing their feathers and shaking them out with vigorous shudders that send up small clouds of pale dust. You stop while they do this, leaning on your switch and watching the dust settle slowly back to the ground, and you notice how the light catches the particles and makes them sparkle for an instant before they vanish. A pair of meadow peepits flit up from the heather as you pass, their small brown bodies rising on quick whirring wings, their calls a high thin seep-seep that sounds like two pebbles tapped together. They fly a short distance, drop back into the vegetation, and then fly up again as the geese draw nearer, repeating this pattern several times before veering off to the north and disappearing against the pale sky. You follow their flight with your eyes for as long as you can, and when they're gone, you look ahead again and see the common stretching away in front of you, mile after mile of rolling ground dotted with heather and gorse, rising and falling in waves that seem to breathe under the thin cloud. The distant line of trees that marks the far edge of the common is just visible. A dark smudge on the horizon that might be an hour's walk away, or might be two, distance being hard to judge in such open country. The breeze strengthens slightly, enough to make a sound as it moves through the heather, a low continuous shush that fills the air like the sound of a distant sea. You have never seen the sea, but you have heard it described by the same peddler who told you about ships and harbours, and you imagine it must sound something like this, a vast whisper that never stops. The heather stems bend under the wind and then straighten, bend and straighten, their movements making patterns that travel across the common in waves, and you watch these waves the way you might watch clouds, seeing shapes in them that dissolve as soon as you name them. The geese lower their heads into the wind and push forward, their feathers ruffling slightly along their backs, and the old gander at the front of the flock lets out a low murmuring sound that seems to be for no one but himself. You walk on, and the morning settles around you like a blanket, warm and heavy and full of small, quiet things. A butterfly, white with pale green veining on its underwings, flutters up from a patch of clover and circles your head once before drifting away on the breeze. The clover itself is low to the ground, its leaves in threes, its flower heads small and pinkish white, and the geese find it with unerring accuracy, plucking the blossoms with delicate sideways tugs of their bills. A beetle, iridescent green, crawls across the toe of your clog and then drops off into the sand, landing on its back and waving its legs in the air for a moment before righting itself and scuttling into the shelter of a heather stem. You watch all of this with the calm attention that comes from having nowhere to be except where you are, and you feel the hours of the day stretching out ahead of you like the common itself, wide and unhurried. The sun climbs higher, still veiled by cloud, and the warmth on your shoulders deepens from a pale suggestion into a real presence that seeps through your shawl and dress and settles into the muscles of your back. You feel a small bead of sweat form at your hairline, and you wipe it away with the back of your hand, the gesture automatic. The road continues its gentle rise and fall, each shallow dip revealing a new stretch of heather and gorse that looks exactly like the stretch you have just crossed. And the repetition is not monotonous, but soothing, a rhythm of landscape that matches the rhythm of your walking. You look ahead and see no one, just the open common and the distant dark line of trees that has grown slightly closer, its individual shapes now just beginning to resolve out of the general blur. The flock moves around you in their scattered formation, and the sounds of the wind in the heather and the buzz of the bees and the soft gabbling of the geese merge into a single quiet music that carries you forward, step by step by step, into the heart of the peaceful morning. The common begins to slope downward so gradually that you feel the change in your legs before you see it in the land, a subtle easing of effort as the ground tilts toward a hidden fold in the landscape. The heather thins and gives way to coarser grasses, their blades broader and darker green, and scattered among them are clumps of rushes with round stiff stems that stand up straight, like pins in a cushion. The sandy soil grows darker and damper underfoot, and you notice that your clogs leave deeper prints now, the impressions holding their shape instead of crumbling inward as they did on the dry heath. A new smell rises from the earth, cool and fresh and faintly muddy, the scent of water moving slowly through ground that never fully dries out, and you breathe it in with a small lift of your chin, recognizing the approach of the brook long before you can see it. The geese recognize it too. Their scattered formation begins to contract and draw together, the wide-fronted foraging pattern collapsing into a tighter group that moves with more purpose toward the hidden line of the stream. The old gander lifts his head higher and walks faster, his orange feet slapping the damp ground with a quicker rhythm, and the younger birds hurry to keep up, their necks bobbing. Their gabble changes in pitch and urgency, becoming higher and more excited, a sound that you know means water ahead, and you smile slightly without changing your pace, letting them pull you forward rather than driving them from behind. The hazel switch taps your ankle once, twice, and then you lift it and hold it across your shoulder like a yoke, your wrist resting on the smooth wood. The sound of the brook reaches you before the sight of it, a low, continuous murmur that has been hiding under the noise of the wind and the geese for some time, but now separates itself and becomes distinct. It is not a loud sound, not the rush of a full river or the tumble of a waterfall, but a soft, steady purling that rises and falls in small variations as the water moves around stones and over shallow beds of gravel. As you walk, the sound clarifies, and soon you can pick out individual notes within it, the higher liquid trill where the channel narrows, the deeper gurgle where it widens into a small pool, the occasional plink of a drop falling from an overhanging leaf. The sound wraps around you like cool fingers, and you realize that the morning has grown warm enough that the thought of cold water is pleasant rather than daunting. The ground drops more steeply now, and the track bends slightly to the left to follow the contour of a low bank. The rushes grow thicker here, their stiff stems brushing against your skirt with a dry rustling sound, and among them you see the first gleam of water, a flash of silver-brown light that appears and disappears as you walk. Then the bank falls away, and the brook lies before you, a ribbon of clear brown water about the width of a cart, running smoothly between low banks of dark earth held together by the roots of alder and willow. The water is the color of strong tea, stained by the peat through which it has passed on its journey down from the higher ground, and yet it is perfectly transparent, so that you can see every pebble on the bottom, every strand of waterweed swaying in the current, every small disturbance where an insect touches the surface. The crossing place is marked by stepping stones, a line of flat grey rocks set into the stream bed at intervals, just wide enough for a human stride. They were placed here long ago, before anyone now living can remember, and their surfaces have been worn smooth by generations of feet until they gleam faintly even in the diffuse light. Some are dark and solid, their tops broad and level, while others tilt slightly or have one corner submerged by the weight of the water pushing against them. Pale green algae further downstream sides in velvety patches that sway in the current like green smoke, and where the water breaks around each stone, it forms a small V-shaped ripple that points downstream and vanishes after a hand's length. The whole arrangement is simple and ancient and perfectly fitted to its purpose, and you have crossed it so many times that you no longer think about the placement of each stone, but trust your feet to find them. The geese, of course, ignore the stepping stones entirely. They splash straight into the brook with a great flurry of wings and a chorus of satisfied honks, their orange feet finding the stream bed with the confidence of creatures born to water. The water comes up to their bellies in the deepest part, darkening their white feathers to a soft grey where it touches, and they dip their heads and scoop up mouthfuls, tilting their bills skyward to let the water run down their long throats in shining rivulets. The young grey goose dunks its entire head under the surface and comes up shaking, droplets flying from its bill in a spray that catches the light for an instant and falls back into the stream with a patter of small splashes. Other geese dabble at the watercress that grows in thick green mats along the edges of the brook, their bills working sideways to pull the strands free, and the cress comes up with a soft tearing sound and a smell that is clean and peppery and sharp. You stand on the bank for a moment, watching them enjoy themselves, and then you step forward onto the first stone. The rock is cool through the wood of your clog, and you feel the faint vibration of the water moving against its submerged sides, a tiny humming sensation transmitted through the stone and the wood and into the bones of your foot. You shift your weight forward and step to the next stone, and the next, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of someone crossing water, one arm slightly extended for balance, the hazel switch held out to the side like a tail. The stepping stones are spaced for legs longer than yours, and you have to stretch slightly for the middle one, your clog finding the worn hollow in its center with a soft clack. The water flows past on either side of you, close enough that you could trail your fingers in it if you bent down, and it makes a gentle liquid sound as it divides around the stone beneath your feet, a sound like someone pouring from a jug in another room. In the middle of the brook, you pause and look down through the clear brown water. The stream bed here is a mosaic of small stones in colors that the water makes richer, deep reds, soft greens, greys flecked with white, browns that shade into purple. The pebbles are worn perfectly smooth, their edges rounded by centuries of water passing over them, and they overlap one another like scales on a fish. A water beetle rows past beneath you, its legs moving in a steady rhythm that propels it upstream against the current. Its body a dark oval that casts a tiny shadow on the stones. A strand of waterweed waves in the flow, its leaves long and ribbon-like. Its color a green so deep it is almost black in the dimmer light under the surface. You watch the beetle until it vanishes into the shadows under the far bank, and then you take the last 2 steps and climb onto the opposite shore. The far bank is a gentle slope of grass and moss, and you kneel there at the water's edge, setting the hazel switch aside on the ground. You cup your hands and dip them into the brook, feeling the cold shock of the water close around your fingers, a cold that is clean and sharp and somehow alive. You lift the water to your face and splash it onto your cheeks and forehead, and the cold makes you draw a quick breath, your skin tightening and then relaxing as the water drips down your temples and along the line of your jaw. You scoop up more water and drink from your cupped palms, the liquid cold and tasting faintly of earth and roots and the minerals it is carried down from the hills. It fills your mouth and throat with a freshness that seems to wash away the dust of the road, and you drink 3 handfuls before you are satisfied, wiping your chin with the back of your wrist. The geese are still in the water, some swimming now in the small pool that has formed upstream of the crossing, their bodies buoyant and graceful in a way they never are on land. The water holds them high, and they paddle with their orange feet in slow figure-8 motions that propel them across the pool without apparent effort, leaving V-shaped wakes that spread out behind them and overlap and dissipate. The old gander has found a spot where the current brings small morsels of something edible, and he stands in the shallows with his head submerged, his tail tipped up toward the sky, his body a white comma balanced on the water. The warm-backed female floats at the edge of the pool with her neck curved back and her bill resting on her breast, her eyes half closed in the contentment of a creature that has exactly what it needs. You sit back on the bank, the grass cool and slightly damp beneath you, and you stretch your legs out in front, crossing your ankles. One of your clog straps has loosened during the walk, the leather tongue slipping slightly out of its buckle, and you reach down to tighten it, pulling the strap snug across your instep and working the tongue back through the hole. The leather is dark with age and supple from use, and it takes the new hole easily, settling into place with a small creak. You flex your foot inside the clog, and the strap holds firm, so you let your hands fall back into your lap, and you simply sit, watching the geese and the water and the slow movement of the alder leaves overhead. An alder grows on this bank, its roots exposed where the stream has undercut the earth, forming a dark tangle of woody fingers that reach down into the water. Its leaves are round and slightly notched at the tip, their surface is a dull green that catches the light in a matte sheen, and they tremble constantly in the small breeze that moves along the course of the brook. The bark of the alder is dark grey-brown and smooth in places, rough and fissured in others, and small cone-like fruits from last autumn still cling to its branches, dried and black and rattling softly when the wind stirs them. A wren hops among the lower branches, a tiny brown bird with a tail that sticks up sharply, and it makes a quick ticking sound before flitting away into the denser growth upstream. A frog plops into the pool from somewhere on the far bank, a sudden small sound that makes you turn your head in time to see the ripple spreading in perfect circles from the point where it vanished. The circles widen and weaken, crossing one another, and within moments the surface of the pool is smooth again, the frog hidden somewhere in the depths among the waterweed and the stones. You wait to see if it will surface, but it does not, and after a time you stop waiting and let your attention drift back to the geese. They're beginning to climb out of the water now, their dabbling and swimming done, and they waddle up the low bank with their feathers darkened along their bellies and their orange feet leaving wet prints in the grass. They shake themselves vigorously, one after another, the motion starting at the head and moving down the body in a wave, until the tail gives a final flick, and water flies from their feathers in a fine spray that catches the light. The young grey goose shakes so hard it loses its balance and stumbles sideways into a clump of rushes, recovering with a slightly offended look and a quick rearrangement of its wings. The old gander is the last to leave the water, stepping out with the dignity of a creature who has been wet many times before and will be wet many times again. And he pauses on the bank to preen a stray feather on his chest. his bill working with a delicate precision that seems at odds with his size. You rise from the grass, your skirt damp where the ground is soaked through, and you brush the loose bits of leaf and moss from the fabric with a few quick swipes of your hand. The hazel switch lies where you dropped it, and you pick it up by its smooth end, feeling the familiar weight settle into your palm. The sun is higher now, still behind its veil of cloud, and the light that falls through the alder leaves is dappled and green, shifting in patterns that move with the breeze and the angle of the branches. The brook murmurs behind you as you turn back to the track, and the geese, refreshed and reordered, begin to form their loose walking line once more, their feet finding the sandy wheel tracks with the ease of long habit. You step out onto the path, the clopping of your clogs resuming its steady rhythm, and the sound of the brook fades slowly behind you, folding back into the landscape until it is only a memory of coolness on your skin, a taste of earth and roots still lingering at the back of your throat. The track beyond the brook rises at first, climbing a low bank that lifts you out of the damp hollow and back onto drier ground, and then it levels into a long flat stretch that skirts the edge of a fallow field, so wide its far boundary is only a guess, a line of darker brush against the pale sky. The field lies to your left, a great expanse of earth that has been ploughed and then left to rest, its furrows still visible as long parallel ridges running straight toward the horizon, their crests softened by weather into rounded humps. Nothing grows there now except a scattering of volunteer plants, thin, pale things that have seeded themselves from the wind and the birds, and now cling to the ridges with the tenacity of things that ask for nothing. The soil is a pale brown-grey, the color of dried mud on a cartwheel, and in the stronger light of midday it takes on a faint sheen, as if the earth itself were polished by the sun. You walk with the field on one side and a low tangle of hedgerow on the other, the track squeezed between them so that the geese must walk in a tighter group than they did on the open common. The hedgerow is a mix of hawthorn and blackthorn and the occasional wild rose, their branches interlaced into a dense barrier that has not been trimmed in many seasons and now reaches out into the track with long whippy shoots that catch at your skirt if you walk too close. The hawthorn is coming into leaf, small green buds breaking through the grey bark, and here and there a thorn as long as your thumbnail gleams with a drop of dew that has somehow survived the morning. The geese keep to the centre of the track, away from the reaching branches, and you walk on the field side where the ground is open and the breeze can find you. The sun has climbed to its highest point, or near enough that the difference is hard to judge, and it beats down through the thin cloud with a warmth that is no longer gentle but steady and insistent. The heat makes the dust rise from the track in little puffs that hang in the air for a moment before settling back onto your clogs and the hems of your skirt and the feathers of the nearest geese. You feel the sweat beginning to gather at your temples and along the back of your neck, and you push your shawl further off your shoulders, letting it drape from your elbows where it swings lightly with each step. The air smells of dry earth and warm grass and the faint peppery scent of something in the hedgerow that you cannot name but have known all your life. A mile passes, or something like a mile, measured not in distance but in the steady accumulation of steps and the slow change in the landscape. The fallow field continues on your left, unchanging, its furrows running parallel to the track as if escorting you on your journey, and you find a strange comfort in their regularity, their long straight lines that never waver or turn. The geese have grown quieter as the heat builds, their gabble reduced to an occasional low murmur, and they walk with their bills slightly open and their wings held a little away from their bodies to let the air circulate. The old gander has slowed his pace, his feet coming down with less energy than they had in the cool of the morning, and the warm-backed female at the rear is lagging further behind than usual, her steps smaller and more deliberate. You adjust your own pace to match theirs, slowing your walk until your clogs strike the ground in a long, easy rhythm, a slow heartbeat of wood on earth. Then the track bends slightly to the right, following the line of the hedgerow as it curves away from the field, and you see ahead of you the dark shape of the shepherd's hut. It stands about 200 paces off the track, at the edge of where the fallow field gives way to rougher ground, and at first it is just a grey rectangle against the green and brown of the landscape, a shape that could be anything. As you walk closer it resolves into walls of rough stone, their upper edges jagged and uneven where the roof has fallen in, and you can see the dark gap of a doorway and the empty sockets of two small windows. The stone is the same grey-brown as the field soil, quarried from somewhere nearby long ago, and it has been laid without mortar in the old way, each stone fitted against its neighbours so that the walls seem to have grown out of the earth rather than been built upon it. No one has lived here for a long time. The war emptied this place, as it emptied so many places, and the shepherd who once used it as a shelter during lambing season or a refuge from sudden storms is gone now, his name forgotten, his flock scattered or sold or taken. The hut has settled into its abandonment with a kind of quiet dignity, the stones weathering and softening, the empty windows gazing out at the field with the patient blankness of old eyes. A clump of elder has grown up against one wall, its branches pushing through the gaps where stones have fallen, and its leaves are a vivid green that seems almost too bright against the grey rock. The elder is in bud, its flower heads still tight green clusters that will open into creamy discs in another month, and the smell of its leaves, sharp and slightly rank, drifts across the space between the track and the hut. You guide the geese off the road with a gentle pressure of your presence, stepping to the side and holding the hazel switch out as a barrier to turn them toward the hut. They go willingly, as if they too have been waiting for this rest, and they follow the faint path that leads off the main track and across a strip of rough grass to where the hut stands. The path is barely visible, just a slight depression in the grass where feet have walked before, but it is enough to guide you forward until you reach the hut's low walls. The walls stand about waist high, the tops ragged, but their bases still solid, and inside the roofless rectangle the ground is packed hard and scattered with bits of fallen stone and the dry remains of plants that have blown in over the years. A flat slab of stone, perhaps once part of the hearth, lies against the back wall, its surface worn smooth and inviting, and you see it as a seat the moment your eyes find it. The geese find their own resting places without any help from you. They settle into the shade between the outer wall of the hut and the elder clump, where a narrow corridor of shadow has formed that is just wide enough for their bodies. The shadow is deep and cool, the elder leaves filtering the sunlight into a dim green glow, and the birds arrange themselves in it with the contented murmuring of creatures who have walked far and are now comfortable. Some tuck their bills under their wings immediately, one orange eye still visible and slowly blinking, while others sit with their necks curved back and their bodies settled onto the cool earth in the posture of birds who do not intend to move for some time. The old gander takes the spot closest to the wall, his back against the warm stone, and he closes both eyes with an air of great finality. You step through the gap in the wall that was once the doorway, your clogs scraping on the threshold stone that still lies there half buried in the dirt. Inside the hut the air is still and warm, heated by the sun on the stone, but somehow also holding a memory of coolness from the earth beneath, and it smells of dust and old stone and the faint dry perfume of whatever plants have grown and died here over the seasons. You cross to the flat slab and sit down, the stone cool through your skirt despite the warmth of the day, and you let your shoulders drop and your hands rest in your lap with the hazel switch laid across your knees. The relief of sitting is so great that you feel it as a physical sensation, a loosening all down your spine and through your hips, and you close your eyes for a moment just to feel it more fully. When you open your eyes again, you reach into the fold of your shawl where you stored the bread and cheese this morning, and you bring out the small linen-wrapped bundle. The cloth is slightly damp from the warmth of your body, and you unfold it carefully on your lap, revealing the heel of dark bread and the wedge of hard cheese that you cut before dawn. The bread is dense and heavy, its crust dark brown and dusted with flour, and when you break off a piece it comes apart with a slight crumbling at the edges. You put it in your mouth and chew slowly, the bread softening as you work it, releasing a faint, sour taste of rye and the deeper, earthier flavor of the coarse flour. The cheese is firm and slightly crumbly, pale ivory in color, and it tastes sharp and salty on your tongue, a bright note against the dark bread. You eat in small bites, chewing each one thoroughly, and you look out through the empty doorway at the fallow field and the pale sky and the distant line of the hedgerow where the track continues its patient way toward the town. A small Finn dog sometimes follows you on these journeys, appearing out of nowhere at the edge of the village and trotting along behind the flock with its tail held high and its ears cocked forward. It is not your dog exactly, not anyone's dog, just a creature that has decided the road is more interesting than the village, and the geese are worth following and you are a person worth trusting. Today, it is not here. You noticed its absence when you first left the cottage, and you notice it again now as you crumble a small piece of bread between your fingers out of habit, the crumbs falling onto the packed earth at your feet, where the dog would have snapped them up with quick darting movements of its head. You brush the crumbs off your lap, and they join the dust on the floor, small pale specks that will be found later by ants or beetles, or simply dissolve into the soil. The absence of the dog is not a sadness, just a fact, like the absent roof or the absent shepherd, and you accept it without resistance. The warmth of the midday has settled over the hut like a blanket, and the stone around you radiates a gentle heat that smells of dust and old sun. You can smell the elder leaves too, their sharp green scent drifting in on the small movements of the air, and underneath that there is the faint animal smell of the geese, a warm, feathery smell that is as familiar to you as the smell of your own skin. A light breeze moves through the elder clump every so often, and when it does, the leaves rustle with a soft papery sound, and the patterns of shadow on the ground shift and rearrange themselves like pieces of a puzzle being slowly solved. The breeze touches your face too, a cool finger on your cheek and forehead, and then it passes and the stillness returns. White butterflies appear above the nettle patch that has grown up against the far corner of the hut, their wings catching the light as they flutter in small erratic circles around one another. There are 3 of them, or 4, it is hard to tell because they move so constantly, rising and falling and weaving, and their white wings flash against the dark green of the nettles like small scraps of paper caught in an eddy of wind. The nettles themselves are tall and vigorous, their serrated leaves hanging heavy with the heat, and you know from experience that touching them would leave a burning rash on your skin. But the butterflies touch them constantly and without harm, landing for an instant on a leaf and then lifting off again as if the plant were just another surface in a world full of surfaces. You watch the butterflies until their movements become hypnotic and your eyes begin to feel heavy, and then you let your gaze drop and your eyelids close. You do not sleep deeply, not here in the open with the sun on your face and the hard stone beneath you, but you drift into a shallow doze where the sounds of the world continue to reach you, but lose their distinctness. The murmur of the geese becomes a soft, continuous hum, the rustle of the elder leaves, a whisper, the distant call of a bird, a single note held and then released. Your thoughts become loose and disconnected, images floating up and dissolving, the stepping stones in the brook, the crow flying over the oak, the pale sand of the common. Your uncle's face as he agreed you could make the journey alone. None of these thoughts demands your attention, and you let them pass through you the way the breeze passes through the elder leaves, arriving and departing without resistance. The doze lasts perhaps a quarter of an hour, perhaps a little more, and when you open your eyes again, the world has shifted slightly. The shadows have moved, the sun having travelled a small distance across the sky while you rested, and the patch of shade where the geese are sitting has narrowed so that some of the birds now lie in partial sunlight. They do not seem to mind, their feathers soaking up the warmth without discomfort, and the old gander has not moved at all. The butterflies are gone from the nettle patch, or perhaps they are the same butterflies resting somewhere out of sight, their white wings folded and still. The bread and cheese have left a pleasant fullness in your stomach, not heavy, but sustaining, and you feel the energy from the food beginning to move through your body, readying you for the second half of the journey. You sit for a while longer, not because you need to, but because the moment is too peaceful to hurry away from. The stone slab beneath you has grown warm from your body, and you shift slightly to find a cooler spot, your skirt moving against the smooth rock with a soft hush. You examine the palms of your hands, noting the fine lines of dust that have settled into the creases, and you rub them together to brush the dust away. The hazel switch has left a faint green stain on your fingers where you have been holding it, the sap from the fresh wood working its way into your skin, and you look at the stain without concern, knowing it will fade in a day or two. Everything about this moment is ordinary and quiet and complete in itself, and you feel a deep sense of rightness that has no name and needs none. Eventually the geese begin to stir before you do, as they often do, their internal sense of the day telling them that the rest has been long enough. The young grey goose stands up first, stretching its wings wide and flapping them a few times before folding them back against its body, and the movement sends a small puff of dust up from the ground. The worn-backed female opens her eyes and blinks slowly, and then she rises too, her legs pushing her body up with the careful deliberation of age. The old gander is the last to move, waiting until several of the others are already on their feet, before he uncurls his neck from his breast and stands, shaking his head once and then looking directly at you, with an expression that clearly says it is time to go. You meet his amber gaze and nod slightly, as if answering a question spoken aloud, and you push yourself up from the stone slab, your legs stiff from sitting but ready to walk again. You brush the dust from your skirt with a few quick motions and adjust your shawl back onto your shoulders, the wool warm from the sun, but still comforting in its familiar weight. The linen cloth that held your bread and cheese you fold and tuck back into your belt, and you pick up the hazel switch from where it rested across your knees, feeling its smooth length settle into your grip. The geese are already moving toward the gap in the wall, their bodies filing out through the low opening and onto the faint path that leads back to the track. And you follow them with a last glance around the roofless hut, the empty windows, the nettle patch, the elder clump with its bright green leaves and its tight flower buds. The shepherd who once slept here is gone, and you will be gone too in a moment, and the hut will remain, waiting for the next traveller who needs a place to rest, its stones holding the memory of all the quiet mid-mornings that have passed within its walls. You step out onto the path, the sun warm on your head and shoulders, and you see the track ahead of you stretching away into the afternoon, straight and inviting, empty of anyone but you and the geese and the long shadows that have begun to stretch out from every bush and stone. The flock has already found the wheel ruts again, their orange feet padding along the familiar grooves, and you fall into place behind them with the hazel switch tapping its gentle rhythm against your ankle. The rest at the hut is over, folded into the past, and the road ahead is waiting, just as it has been waiting all morning, patient and quiet, and full of the small ordinary things that make up a day. The rest at the shepherd's hut has left a pleasant stillness in your limbs, a looseness that carries you back onto the track with a renewed sense of ease, and as you step out of the elder's shade, the sun meets you with a warmth that has deepened since you sat down. It is no longer the pale warmth of morning, but a fuller, heavier heat that presses on your shoulders and the crown of your head, and the sky above has thinned its veil of cloud so that the light comes through in broad, solid sheets that make the world look bleached and dusty. You squint slightly as your eyes adjust, and you see that the shadows have grown longer and sharper, each bush and stone now dragging a dark double of itself across the pale earth. The geese, rising from their own rest, shake off the last of their drowsiness and fall back into the walking line, with a series of soft honks and the dry rustle of feathers being settled into place. The track ahead resumes its straight course from the hut, and almost immediately the character of the landscape changes again. The hedgerow that crowded your left shoulder falls away, replaced by a low stone wall that runs in a perfectly straight line alongside the road, for as far as you can see. The wall is built of the same grey-brown stone as the hut, each piece roughly squared and fitted together without mortar, and it stands about waist high, its top capped with larger flat stones that overhang slightly and cast a narrow band of shade onto the ground below. Beyond the wall lies a fallow grain field, one of many that strike this part of the countryside in long parallel strips, and it stretches away from you in a flat expanse of pale stubble and bare earth that seems to have no end. On the other side of the track another stone wall runs in perfect parallel with the first, and beyond it another field mirrors the one on the left, so that you are walking down a corridor of stone and open land, the road an arrow drawn between two identical expanses. The symmetry is strangely calming. The walls on either side provide a sense of enclosure after the wide openness of the common, but the fields themselves are so vast and empty that the feeling is not of confinement, but of being held in a gentle frame. You walk in the center of the track, the wheel ruts once again, deep and well-defined here, and your clogs make a steady clopping sound that echoes faintly off the stone walls before being swallowed by the open air above. The geese, sensing the straightness of the road ahead, fall into a single loose file that weave slightly from side to side as different birds find different patches of interest among the weeds growing at the base of the walls. The old gander leads as always, his neck bobbing with a metronomic regularity, and the warm-backed female brings up the rear with her slow, deliberate stride that you have come to know as well as your own. The walking becomes, after a time, something that your body does without any input from your mind. Left clog, right clog, left clog, right clog. The rhythm so deep and so familiar that you are no longer aware of the individual steps, but only of the slow forward motion, the gentle swaying of your hips and shoulders, the way your weight shifts from one foot to the other in a continuous flow. The hazel switch hangs from your fingers with its tip, just brushing the ground, and it leaves a faint wavering line in the dust, a trail that will be erased by the next breeze or the next set of wheels. Your thoughts, freed from the need to direct your body, drift in and out of the present moment like the patterns of light and shadow on the road, sometimes fixed on a detail of the landscape, sometimes wandering back to the cool water of the brook or the rough bark of the boundary oak, sometimes settling into a wordless space where there is nothing but the rhythm of walking and the sound of the geese. Dust rises around you in a fine tan haze, lifted by your clogs and the feet of the flock, and it hangs in the still air like a thin fog that catches the sunlight and makes it visible as a soft golden glow. The dust settles on everything, the hems of your skirt, the feathers of the geese, the leaves of the weeds along the wall, the backs of your hands when you turn them over to look. It is a fine powder, soft as flour, and it has a dry, earthy smell that mixes with the scent of warm stone and the faint sweetness of something blooming unseen in a crack in the wall. You taste the dust on your lips, a faint grittiness that you lick away without thinking, and you notice how the geese occasionally shake their heads or ruffle their feathers to dislodge the particles that have settled on them. The young grey goose, whose feathers are now mostly white but still patched with adolescent brown, sneezes once, a tiny explosive sound that makes you smile, and then it continues walking as if nothing had happened. The stone walls are not entirely featureless. Their surfaces are crusted in places with the same pale green lichen that grows on the boundary oak, and in the deeper cracks between the stones, small plants have taken root. A tuft of wall pennywort with round fleshy leaves that look almost succulent. A spray of tiny ferns that curl and uncurl in the heat. A single pink flower of herb robert pushing up from a crevice and opening its 5 delicate petals to the sun. You notice these things as you pass, each one a small surprise that breaks the uniformity of the walls without disturbing the overall sense of order and repetition. A brown butterfly, its wings edged with small orange spots, rests on one of the capstones with its wings spread flat, absorbing the warmth of the stone, and it does not move as you walk by, trusting its stillness to protect it. The geese pay no attention to the butterfly or the flowers. Their eyes are on the ground, searching for anything edible among the sparse vegetation at the base of the walls. Far ahead, perhaps a mile or more, a line of poplars marks the course of a hidden lane that crosses the main track at a right angle. The poplars are tall and slender, their trunks straight as masts, and their leaves are a grey-green that shimmers constantly in the faint breeze that moves above the ground but does not quite reach down to where you walk. The shimmer is caused by the leaves turning on their flat stems, first showing their pale undersides to the sun and then their darker upper surfaces, so that the whole line of trees appears to flicker and dance even when the air is still. You fix your eyes on the poplars as you walk, and they become a kind of goal, a point on the horizon that measures your progress without you having to count steps. The distance between you and the trees shrinks so slowly that for a long time it does not seem to shrink at all, and you let your gaze drop back to the road only to lift it again a while later and find the poplars a little larger, a little more distinct, their individual trunks now separating out from the general mass of grey-green. The heat builds as you walk, the sun now fully committed to the afternoon, and the dust haze thickens until the distant fields on either side seem to shimmer and waver like a reflection in moving water. The air takes on a heavy stillness, the kind that presses down on the land and holds everything in suspension, and you feel the sweat gathering again at your temples and along the back of your neck. Small beads that grow and merge and then run in slow, cool lines down your skin. You loosen your shawl further, letting it hang from your shoulders, and you unlace the top of your dress just slightly to let the air move against your throat. The geese, with their dense layers of feathers, seem to feel the heat more than you do, and they walk with their bills open and their wings held slightly away from their bodies, panting gently in a way that makes their throats pulse with each breath. You guide them slightly closer to the left-hand wall, where a thin ribbon of shade falls from the capstones, and they walk in it gratefully, their orange feet padding along the cooler strip of earth. A lark sings somewhere high above you, its notes falling down through the heavy air like drops of cool water. The bird itself is invisible, lost in the glare of the sky, but its song is so clear and so intricate that it seems to come from everywhere at once. A continuous stream of trills and warbles and quick liquid runs that never repeat and never pause. You tilt your head back to search for it, but all you see is the pale bowl of the sky, with its thin veil of cloud, now almost entirely dissolved. And you lower your gaze again, content to let the music be its own presence, without a visible source. The lark's song hangs in the warm air for a long time after the bird itself has moved on, and then it fades gradually, the notes thinning out and becoming more widely spaced until they stop altogether. And the silence that follows is deeper and richer for having held them. You have been walking for some time, long enough that the sun has visibly shifted its position in the sky, and you feel the need to check the flock again. Counting the geese is a ritual you perform at intervals throughout the journey, a small anchor that keeps you connected to your task, and you slow your pace slightly so that you can attend to it properly. You point your finger at each bird in turn and murmur the numbers under your breath, your eyes moving from the old gander at the front all the way back to the worn-backed female at the rear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The birds in the middle of the flock are bunched together, and you have to count them twice to be sure. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and there at the end is the 13th goose, the young grey one that has now grown most of its white feathers but still carries the smudge of brown on its neck. All 13 are present, and you let out a small breath of satisfaction. But as you watch the young grey goose, you notice something that you had not seen before. It is walking with a slight unevenness in its gait, its right foot coming down more gingerly than its left, and every few steps it pauses to lift the foot slightly off the ground and flex the orange toes before setting it back down. The limp is subtle, barely noticeable unless you are looking for it, but once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it, and you quicken your pace slightly to draw closer to the bird. The goose glances back at you as you approach, its amber eye bright and alert, and it makes a small sound in its throat that is not quite a honk, a sound that might be a question or might be nothing at all. You walk alongside it for a few paces, watching the movement of its right foot, and you see that it is favoring the outer edge of the foot, avoiding putting weight on the center of the pad. You know what this means, or at least you suspect it. The common was full of small thorns, the sharp points of gorse and the even finer prickles of plants that grow low among the heather, and it is common for a goose to pick one up in the soft webbing of its foot. The thorn is probably small, a dark splinter of gorse or a broken bit of heather stem, and it is lodged just deeply enough to cause discomfort, but not so deeply that it cannot be removed. You file this knowledge away and decide that you will check the foot when you reach the poplars, where you can stop for a moment in the shade without losing too much time. For now, the goose is walking well enough and you do not want to disturb the rhythm of the flock by stopping in the open sun where the heat is at its strongest. The poplars are much closer now, their individual trunks visible as pale grey columns, their leaves still shimmering in that constant silvery dance. The hidden lane they mark is still invisible, lost in the folds of the land, but the trees themselves stand as clear sentinels, and you estimate that you will reach them in perhaps a quarter of an hour at the current pace. The wall on your left continues unbroken, its stones holding the heat of the sun and radiating it back toward you in waves that you can feel on your cheek when you turn your head, and the field beyond it remains the same pale expanse of stubble and bare earth that it has been for the last mile. Nothing moves in the field except the shimmer of heat, and no birds fly across it, and no clouds pass overhead to break the monotony of the pale blue sky. Your walking has become so automatic that you are almost surprised when you find yourself approaching the poplars, their trunks now close enough that you can see the texture of their bark, which is smooth and grey, with darker horizontal bands where old branches have fallen away. The track crosses the hidden lane just beyond the trees, and you can see the intersection now, a simple cross of two dirt roads where the stone walls briefly give way to open ground before resuming on the other side. The poplars cast long strips of shade across the intersection, their leaves rustling with a sound that is louder than the rustle of the elder leaves, a more metallic sound, like thin plates of metal being stirred together. The shade looks cool and inviting after the long stretch of open sun, and you steer the geese toward it with a gentle pressure of your presence, holding the hazel switch out to guide them off the main track and onto the soft ground beneath the trees. The geese settle in the shade with obvious relief, their panting gradually slowing as the cooler air reaches them. The old gander finds a patch of bare earth and sits down heavily, tucking his legs under his body and closing his eyes. The other geese follow his example, arranging themselves in the dappled shadows with small adjustments of wings and necks. You wait until they are all settled, and then you approach the young grey goose, which has stationed itself slightly apart from the others near one of the poplar trunks. It watches you come with its head tilted, and when you kneel down beside it, it does not move away, but stands very still, as if it understands that you are there to help. You take the affected foot in your hand, the orange skin warm and dry and slightly rough under your fingers, and you turn it gently upward so that you can see the underside of the pad. The webbing is soft and supple, and there, embedded in the center of the pad, is a small dark splinter, no longer than a grain of barley. It is a thorn from the common, a fine sharp point of gorse that has worked its way in just deep enough to cause discomfort, but not so deep that it has drawn blood. You take hold of the end of the thorn between your thumb and forefinger, and you pull it out with a single smooth motion. The goose flinches once, a tiny jerk of its leg, and then it relaxes, its foot resting heavy in your hand. You run your thumb over the spot where the thorn was to make sure no piece remains, and the skin there is smooth and unbroken. The goose flexes its toes experimentally, feeling the absence of the thorn, and then it sets the foot down on the ground and shifts its weight onto it. The limp is gone. You release the foot and stand up, brushing the dust from your knees, and the goose looks up at you with an expression that might be gratitude or might simply be the blank curiosity of a bird, and then it turns and walks with a perfectly even gait back toward the rest of the flock. You stand for a moment under the poplars, listening to the rustle of their leaves, feeling the coolness of the shade on your sun-warmed skin. The thorn is still pinched between your fingers, a tiny dark sliver that you examine for a moment before flicking it away into the grass where it will do no more harm. The interruption has been brief, a small necessary task folded into the larger journey, and now it is done. The geese are rested, the sun has moved a little further across the sky, and the track continues its straight course through the grain fields, still arrow straight to the horizon, still bounded by its low stone walls, still waiting for you to walk it. You gather the flock with a soft clack of your tongue, and they rise from the shade with a collective rustle of feathers, and you step back onto the road, the clop of your clogs resuming its steady rhythm as the afternoon stretches on ahead of you, long and quiet and full of light. Around mid-afternoon, the heat of the day begins to ease almost imperceptibly, the sun losing a fraction of its force as it slides past its highest point and starts the long, slow descent toward evening. You feel the change first, as a slight softening of the light, the harsh white glare of midday giving way to a warmer tone that brings out the gold in the dust and the deeper greens in the leaves of the weeds along the wall. The shadows that have been shrinking all morning begin to grow again, stretching eastward from every stone and every stem, and they take on a bluish cast that speaks of the cooler hours to come. Your shawl, which has been hanging loose from your shoulders, now feels less like a burden and more like a comfort, and you pull it back into place without tightening it, letting it rest across your collarbone in a way that holds a little warmth without trapping too much. The geese seem to sense the shift as well. Their pace quickens slightly, and their panting has stopped. Their bills now closed as they walk, their eyes bright and alert. The old gander lifts his head higher and surveys the road ahead with the air of a creature who knows that the hardest part of the day is behind him, and he makes a low murmuring sound that ripples back through the flock like a message passed from one bird to the next. The young grey goose, whose foot has healed completely from the thorn and shows no sign of the earlier limp, walks with a noticeable bounce in its step, its head bobbing enthusiastically as it pecks at the occasional weed or seed along the verge. The worn-backed female at the rear has closed the gap between herself and the rest of the flock, her pace no longer lagging but steady and even, her orange feet slapping the dust in the same rhythm as all the others. The stone walls on either side of the track have continued their straight course for so long that they've become almost invisible, a part of the landscape so constant that you no longer see them. But now, as the afternoon light changes, they begin to show signs of approaching an end. The wall on your left develops a gap where a cart track once crossed the field. The stones tumbled and scattered in a low mound that has been colonized by brambles and a single young elder tree, its leaves bright against the grey rock. Through the gap, you can see the fallow field stretching away unchanged, its furrows now casting long, thin shadows that stripe the pale earth like the ribs of a great animal. Beyond the gap the wall resumes, but it is lower here, the stones smaller and more irregular, as if the builder had been in a hurry or had run out of good material and made do with whatever lay at hand. It is through this gap in the wall that you see the first traveller of the afternoon, a shape moving slowly along a diagonal path that will intersect with the main track somewhere ahead. At first the shape is just a dark smudge against the pale stubble, too far away to make out details, but as you walk and the shape walks too, converging on the same point, it gradually resolves into a man leading a donkey. The donkey is small and grey, its coat the colour of wood ash, and it carries 2 wicker panniers slung across its back, their contents hidden under a piece of sacking, but their shape suggesting lumps of something solid and heavy. The man walks beside the donkey's head with one hand resting lightly on its neck, and his posture is stooped in a way that speaks of age or weariness, or perhaps simply the habit of walking slowly beside a slow animal. He wears a shapeless hat of brown felt, and a coat that might once have been blue but has faded over many years to a colour that is not quite grey and not quite anything else. You reach the intersection of paths at roughly the same moment, the man and his donkey emerging from the gap in the wall, just as you and the geese draw level with it. The geese, unperturbed by the appearance of strangers, part around the donkey's legs like water around a stone, and continue walking, their gabble unchanged in pitch or urgency. The donkey regards the birds with the patient expression of a creature that has seen many things and is surprised by none of them, and it flicks one long ear forward and back again, a gesture that serves no purpose except perhaps to acknowledge that the world continues to be as it is. The man raises his free hand in a small gesture of greeting, and you raise your own hand in return, the hazel switch still held loosely between your fingers. "The road is peaceful today," the man says, and his voice is low and rough in the way of someone who does not speak often, but still remembers how. You nod and agree that it is, and you add that the ceasefire has kept the road quiet for some time now. The man nods at this as if the information is something he already knew and had long since filed away among the other quiet certainties of his life, and he tells you that he is taking charcoal to the market town, the same town you are walking toward. The charcoal in the panniers is from his own kiln in the woods, he explains, made from alder and hazel and the small branches that the forest sheds naturally, and it will burn long and hot without much smoke. You listen to this with the calm attention of someone who has time to hear what others have to say, and you notice the fine black dust that has worked its way into the creases of his hands and the cuffs of his faded coat, a permanent stain that marks his trade as clearly as a sign above a shop. The two of you walk together for a short distance, your pace matched to the slow plodding of the donkey, and the geese flow around all of you like a white river. The man tells you that he has been making charcoal since he was a boy, that his father made charcoal before him, that the woods he works in are the same woods where his grandfather once cut hazel for the kilns. He speaks in short sentences with long pauses between them, and you do not fill the pauses, letting them stand as part of the conversation rather than gaps that need to be closed. The donkey walks with its head low, its large dark eyes fixed on the ground a few feet ahead, and its panniers creak gently with the rhythm of its steps, a sound like old leather being stretched. After a while, the man says that he must turn off at the next crossing to check on a kiln that he left burning 2 days ago, and you nod and wish him a quiet journey, and he raises his hand again in that small gesture of farewell and leads the donkey away down a side track that you had not noticed until now, a faint path through the stubble that disappears into a fold in the land. The geese gabble as the donkey departs, and the sound of the creaking panniers fades slowly until it is gone, and then the road is quiet again. The sun has moved another small increment across the sky, and the light is now definitely golden, a colour like honey held up to a flame, and it falls on the track in long slanting shafts that make the dust glow and the stone walls gleam. The poplars are behind you now, their leaves still shimmering in the distance, and ahead the road continues its straight course through the grain fields, which have begun to change slightly in character. The fallow strips are now interspersed with fields that had been sown with the spring crop, the new growth just beginning to show as a faint green haze over the brown earth, so delicate that you can only see it when you look sideways and catch it against the light. The green is the color of hope, or so people say, and you suppose there is truth in that, though to you it is simply the color of a field in spring, unremarkable and good. A woman appears on the track ahead, walking toward you from the direction of the town. She carries a basket on her arm, the basket woven of withies not unlike the hazel switch you hold, and it is covered with a clean white cloth tucked neatly around the edges. The woman herself is dressed in a plain wool dress of a soft brown color, and she wears a kerchief tied over her hair, the knot at the back of her neck. Her clogs are smaller than yours and painted with a faded pattern of flowers along the wooden sides. A touch of decoration that speaks of a different life, or perhaps just a different way of wearing the same life. She walks with a brisk, efficient stride that eats up the ground, and she is upon you almost before you have fully registered her presence. She stops when she reaches the flock, stepping aside to let the geese pass, and you stop too, as is the custom when two people meet on a road with time to spare. The woman tells you that she is coming back from the market town, having sold her eggs and now returning with an empty basket and a few coins wrapped in a cloth at the bottom of it. Her hens are laying well this month, she says, better than last month and better than the month before that, and she attributes this to the crushed oyster shells she has been mixing into their feed, a trick she learned from her aunt who lives 2 villages over and keeps hens of her own. You listen and nod and say that your uncle's hens have been laying well too, though you do not mention the oyster shells because you do not know if your uncle uses them or not. The woman shifts the basket to her other arm, the empty withies making a light rustling sound, and she asks if the road has been quiet all the way from the village, and you say that it has, that you passed an old man with a charcoal donkey, and before that no one at all. She nods at this, satisfied, and then she wishes you a good market and continues on her way, her brisk stride carrying her past you and down the track toward the village, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she is just a brown speck against the pale stubble, and then nothing at all. The geese barely registered her presence, intent as they were on a patch of chickweed growing along the base of the wall, and they are still nibbling at it when you turn to continue walking. You give them a soft cluck of your tongue, and they lift their heads and resume their forward motion, the flock contracting again into its loose walking formation. The encounter has taken only a few minutes, a small exchange of words and presence that has left no mark on the day except a faint pleasant feeling of having shared the road with someone else, however briefly. The track ahead is still empty, still straight, still bounded by its low stone walls, and you walk on with the hazel switch tapping its gentle rhythm and the sun warm on your left cheek. Not long after the woman disappears from view, perhaps half a mile further along the track, you see 2 small figures approaching from the direction of the town. At first they are just dots on the road ahead, but as the distance between you closes, they resolve into children, a boy and a girl, both barefoot and both dressed in clothes that have been patched so many times that the original fabric is almost lost. The boy is perhaps 8 years old, the girl a little younger, and between them they lead a goat on a length of rope. The goat is white with brown patches, and it walks with the stubborn sideways gait of all goats, its head turning constantly to investigate anything that might be edible, its yellow eyes slotted with horizontal pupils that give it a look of ancient knowing. The rope is looped around the goat's neck in a loose halter, and the boy holds the end of it in both hands, leaning back against the animal's occasional tugs with the practiced weight of someone who has done this many times. The children stop when they see the geese, their eyes going wide in the way of children who are still young enough to find the world interesting. The boy holds the goat still while his sister stares at the flock, counting under her breath with her lips moving silently, her finger pointing at each goose in turn. You slow your pace to give them time to look, and the old gander, sensing the attention, lifts his head and makes a low honking sound that might be a greeting or might be a warning. It is hard to tell. The goat bleats once, a high thin sound that seems to come from somewhere else entirely, and then it lowers its head and begins nibbling at the grass by the side of the track, ignoring the geese entirely. The children do not speak to you and you do not speak to them, but the girl finishes her counting and looks up at you and smiles a small quick smile before turning away, and you smile back without thinking. the expression rising and falling on your face like a ripple on the brook. Then they move on, the boy tugging at the goat's rope and the goat complaining with a short, sharp bleat before giving in and walking forward, its hooves making small neat prints in the dust. The children's bare feet are silent, and within a few moments they are past you and walking away down the track, their figures growing smaller and smaller until the goat is just a white speck and then nothing, and the road is empty again. These encounters have been so brief and so quiet that they feel almost like parts of a dream, faces and voices that appear out of the landscape and then dissolve back into it, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their passing. You walk on, and the afternoon deepens around you, the golden light growing richer and more slanted with each passing moment. The walls on either side of the track have now given way entirely to open ground, the fallow fields replaced by rougher pasture dotted with thistles and the occasional low bush of juniper. The juniper bushes are dark green, almost black in the strong light, and they give off a sharp, clean scent when you brush against them, a smell like the memory of winter. The geese avoid the thistles with practiced care, weaving around them in small detours that barely break the rhythm of their walk, and you avoid them too, your clogs stepping around the spiny leaves with the automatic precision of long habit. The track is wider here, the deep ruts of the earlier miles smooth out into a broad beaten surface that shows the marks of many passages. Cart tracks crisscross the road, some fresh and sharp-edged, others old and softened by weather, and among them are the prints of oxen, their cloven hooves leaving distinctive heart-shaped impressions that overlap and blur into a palimpsest of journeys. You can read the road like a book, seeing in its surface the story of all the travelers who have passed this way in recent days, a cart loaded with something heavy, its wheels cutting deep, a herd of sheep driven to market, their small sharp hooves scattered in a broad swath, a rider on a horse, the prints of the shoes spaced evenly and deep, and everywhere the three-toed tracks of geese, so many that they merge into a single continuous pattern that runs alongside and over and through all the other marks. Your own geese add their prints to this record, each step pressing a new mark into the dust that will be read by the next traveler who comes this way and wonders who passed before them. The light is turning from gold to amber now, the color of the late afternoon when the sun has begun its final descent toward the horizon. Long shadows stretch behind every bush and boulder and thistle, and your own shadow walks beside you like a silent companion, tall and thin and slightly distorted by the uneven ground. You watch it from the corner of your eye, seeing how it mimics your movements exactly, the swing of your arm, the turn of your head, the tap of the hazel switch against your ankle. The gander's shadow stretches out in front of the flock, a long dark bird shape that glides over the ground with an easy grace, and the shadows of the other geese overlap and merge into a single rippling darkness that moves like a second flock beneath them. There is something deeply soothing about the shadows, a reminder that the sun is following its ancient course and that the day is proceeding as it should, neither faster nor slower than any other day. The air has cooled enough that you can feel the difference on your skin, a slight chill that makes you glad of your shawl and glad of the warmth that walking generates in your muscles. The dust that settled on your clothes and on the feathers of the geese now seems less oppressive, less gritty, as if the cooler air has somehow refined it into something softer and less intrusive. You take a deep breath and the air tastes different, carrying a hint of evening, a faint suggestion of dew and cooling earth and the distant smoke of a fire someone has lit in a cottage you cannot see. The geese seem to catch the same scent, and their pace quickens again, their gabble taking on a more purposeful tone as they sense that the end of the journey is drawing nearer. You do not hurry them, and you do not hold them back. You simply walk with them, matching their pace as you have done all day, your body moving in its steady rhythm, the hazel switch swinging gently from your hand. Ahead the land begins to rise slightly, a low swell of ground that hides whatever lies beyond it, and you know that when you reach the top of that rise, you will see the market town for the first time, its church tower rising above the trees, its walls grey and solid in the amber light. The knowledge gives you no urgency, only a quiet sense of anticipation that sits in your chest like a small warm stone, steady and undemanding. You will reach the town when you reach it, and not before, and the time between now and then will be filled with the same walking and the same rhythm and the same quiet companionship of the geese. The afternoon is almost over. The encounters with other wayfarers are behind you, and the road ahead is open and waiting, as it has been all day, as it will be tomorrow for whoever walks it next. The late afternoon deepens around you with the slow certainty of water rising in a pool, the amber light of the past hour shifting into a richer color that lies between gold and copper, a color that seems to have weight and texture as it settles over the land. The sun has dropped far enough that its light now travels almost horizontally across the fields, gilding every stalk of grass and every ridge of plowed earth and every feather on the backs of the geese, until the whole world looks as though it has been dipped in honey and left to set. Your own shadow has grown so long that it stretches out behind you for what seems like 20 paces or more, a thin, dark giant that walks with your gait and swings its arm when you swing yours, and the shadows of the geese have done the same, elongating into fantastical bird shapes that ripple and flow across the uneven ground like dark water. The air is cool to a temperature that feels exactly neutral on your skin, neither warm nor cold, but simply present, a gentle medium through which you move without resistance. The track has changed again while you were not paying attention, widening and smoothing in a way that speaks of regular use and the nearness of a town. The deep ruts of the earlier miles have been worn down by the passage of so many carts and hooves and feet that they have merged into a single broad surface of packed earth, hard and even, almost like a proper road rather than a country track. The stone walls that bounded the grain fields have fallen away entirely now, replaced on both sides by open pasture where sheep have grazed the grass so short that it looks like a green carpet laid over the undulating ground, its surface broken only by the darker green of scattered thistles and the pale discs of sheep droppings that dot the turf like small brown coins. A few sheep are still out, their white shapes standing motionless in the middle distance, and they lift their heads to watch you pass with the blank incurious gaze of animals that have seen many travelers and expect to see many more. A lamb, smaller and woollier than the rest, takes a few skipping steps toward the track before its mother bleats a low warning and it stops, one forehoof raised, its ears swiveling forward and back. The geese pay no attention to the sheep, nor the sheep to the geese, and you walk on through this pastoral quiet, with the hazel switch held loosely in your right hand and your left hand resting against your hip in a posture that has become so habitual over the miles that you no longer feel it as a choice. Your clogs make a different sound on this smoother road, less of a clop and more of a soft thud, the packed earth absorbing some of the impact, so that your footsteps seem quieter and more distant, as if you were walking on a road made of felt. The geese have closed their formation into a tight group again, their bodies almost touching as they walk, and they move with a new alertness that you recognize as the awareness of a journey nearing its end. The old gander holds his head high, his neck stretched to its full length, and he makes a low, continuous murmuring sound that the other geese answer with soft responses, a call and response that carries back through the flock like a ripple. You know without being told that they can smell the town, or hear it, or sense it through some faculty that you do not possess and have never needed, and you trust their instinct the way you trust the sun to set and the morning to come again. Ahead of you the ground begins a long, gentle descent into a shallow valley, and for the first time since the poplars you can see a considerable distance ahead. The track runs straight down the slope and then rises again on the other side, and there, beyond the far rise, a dark smudge on the horizon is beginning to resolve itself into the shapes of buildings and trees and the unmistakable vertical line of a church tower. The tower is square and solid, built of the same grey stone as the walls and the shepherd's hut, and it rises above a mass of darker shapes that must be the roofs of the town, their red tiles and grey thatch blending into a single muted colour at this distance. A layer of misty green hovers around the base of the tower, the tops of trees that grow in the churchyard or perhaps along the town's main street, and the whole vision is so familiar and so long awaited that you feel something loosen in your chest, a small easing of a tension you did not know you had been carrying. The town is there, just as it has always been, and you will reach it before dusk, just as you always have. The walk down the slope is easy, your legs moving with the slight assistance of gravity, and you let your pace remain steady without pushing it faster. There is no hurry now, and there never was, but the nearness of the destination makes the walking feel different, less like an endless rhythm and more like a gentle unwinding, the final turns of a thread coming off a spindle. You notice details of the landscape that you might have missed earlier in the day, when the sun was high and the dust was thick, and your mind was fixed on the miles ahead. The grass on the verges is dotted with small white flowers that you do not know the name of, their petals opening to catch the last of the light. A flock of starlings passes overhead in a loose chattering cloud, their wings whirring with a sound like a great bolt of silk being torn, and they wheel once over the pasture before dropping out of sight behind a copse of trees. A single buttercup grows at the very edge of the track, its yellow head brighter than it has any right to be in the fading light, and you look at it as you pass, and then look back at it over your shoulder, seeing how it glows against the darkening grass like a small fallen piece of the sun. The ground at the bottom of the slope is damp underfoot, a shallow dip where water collects after rain, and the track here has been reinforced with rough cobbles that press unevenly against the soles of your clogs and make you walk with a slight adjustment to your balance, your ankles flexing to accommodate the irregular surface. The geese navigate the cobbles with the same careful precision they have shown all day, their orange feet finding the flatter stones and avoiding the gaps between them, and their gabble echoes slightly off the hard surfaces with a hollower sound than it made on the earth and sand of the earlier miles. A small culvert runs under the track here, a channel of stone that carries the drainage from one side of the road to the other, and you can hear the faint trickle of water moving through it. A sound so quiet that you might have missed it if the world were not so still. You pause for just a moment at the edge of the cobbles, listening to the water, and then you walk on, your clogs finding the smoother surface of the packed earth on the far side, and the ground begins to rise again, drawing you up toward the town. The climb is gentle but long, a gradual ascent that makes your legs work a little harder and your breath come a little deeper, and you feel the warmth of the effort spreading through your muscles as the track carries you up out of the damp hollow and onto the higher ground. The view opens with every step, the town and its church tower growing larger and more distinct, and soon you can pick out individual details. The crenellations at the top of the tower, dark against the pale sky. The steep pitch of the church roof, its tiles of faded red that glows warmly in the amber light. The cluster of smaller buildings huddled around the church like chicks around a hen, their walls whitewashed or left bare, their roofs a mix of thatch and tile. A thin curl of smoke rises from somewhere in the center of the town, straight at first and then bent by a breeze you cannot feel, and the sight of it fills you with a quiet sense of comfort, the knowledge that there are hearths burning and meals cooking and people going about their ordinary lives. As the track levels out near the top of the rise, you come upon a small wayside shrine set into the verge on the right-hand side. It is a simple thing, a niche of plastered stone about the height of your shoulder with a small slate roof that projects outward to keep off the rain. Inside the niche stands a carved stone figure, weathered by years of wind and weather, so that its features are soft and indistinct, but you can still make out the shape of a figure with hands clasped and head bowed. The plaster that lines the niche has been whitewashed at some point, and even now, in the fading light, it holds a faint luminosity that makes the shrine visible from a long way off, a pale rectangle against the dark green of the hedge behind it. Someone has placed a bunch of wildflowers at the figure's feet, campion and buttercup and a sprig of something purple that is already beginning to wilt, and you look at them as you pass, noting the care with which they have been arranged, the stems all facing the same way. You do not stop at the shrine, but you do slow your pace slightly, and one of the geese, the warm-backed female, pauses to peck at a tuft of grass growing at the base of the plastered wall. You wait for her, standing with your weight on one hip and the hazel switch resting across your shoulder, and while you wait, you look out across the valley you have just crossed. The view from here is wide and calm, and filled with the last of the afternoon light, the fields and pastures laid out like a patchwork blanket that has been thrown over the contours of the land. The track you have walked is visible as a pale line winding back across the fields and disappearing into the haze of distance, and you can trace its course with your eyes, picking out the dark smudge of the poplars and the faint line of the stone walls and the distant rise where the common begins. It looks like a long way, and it is a long way, and you have walked all of it step by step by step. The thought is not one of pride, but of simple fact, a statement that requires no comment, and you turn away from the view with the same calm with which you received it. The worn-backed female has finished her grazing and is walking toward the rest of the flock, which has continued on without her, and is now perhaps 20 paces ahead. You follow her, your clogs making their soft thud on the packed earth, and you notice that your shadow has grown even longer and thinner, stretching out in front of you now rather than behind, a sign that the sun is well into its descent. The light has shifted from amber to a deeper tone, a color that is almost russet, and the shadows have taken on a purplish cast that makes them look like pools of dark water gathering in the hollows of the land. The air has cooled further, and you pull your shawl a little tighter across your chest, tucking the ends more securely into your belt. The geese seem to feel the chill too, or perhaps they are simply eager to reach their destination, because their pace has quickened again, their feet pattering on the road with a faster rhythm that you match without thinking. The road is now clearly a road rather than a track, its surface broad and well maintained, its verges trimmed back so that the grass is short and neat. The prints of carts and hooves and feet are everywhere, overlapping in a dense palimpsest that tells of constant traffic, and you can see the first signs of the town's immediate surroundings, a pile of cut brushwood stacked neatly by the side of the road, a field where someone has been digging marl and left the pits open to the sky, a small orchard of apple trees with their branches just beginning to show the first pink hints of blossom. The trees are gnarled and old, their trunks twisted into shapes that look almost human, and their shadows stretch across the road in long dark bars that you and the geese cross, one after another, stepping from light into shade and back into light. The geese are almost running now, or as close to running as geese ever get, their bodies swaying side to side with a rolling urgency that makes you smile despite yourself. You let them pull ahead slightly, the hazel switch now held across your body like a staff rather than a drover's wand, and you watch them with a quiet fondness that has grown over the miles until it fills you entirely. The old gander honks once, a loud, clear call that carries across the fields and echoes faintly off the church tower ahead, and the other geese answer him with a chorus of smaller honks and murmurs, their voices overlapping in a brief celebration of arrival. You can see the town wall now, a low rampart of grey stone that runs in a broad curve around the outskirts, and you can see the dark arch of the gate standing open to the road, and you can see the watchman leaning on his halberd in the shadow of the gatehouse, his figure still and patient, waiting for the evening and the travellers it will bring. The track has become a road, and the road has brought you here, to the top of the last rise, where the town lies before you in the gathering dusk. You walk on, the clop of your clogs steady and unhurried, and the town grows larger with every step, its walls and towers and roofs filling your vision until they are the whole world. The afternoon is over, the journey is nearly done, and the last of the sunlight is slipping away into the west, leaving behind a sky streaked with rose and gold and the first faint stars. You walk toward the gate with your flock around you, and the shadows walk with you, long and dark and peaceful as the day folds itself quietly away. The town wall comes into view through the deepening dusk, a low rampart of grey stone that curves across the landscape in a long, gentle arc, its surface patched with lichen and darkened by the shadows of the approaching evening. The wall is not high, no taller than two men standing on each other's shoulders, and it has the settled look of something that was built a long time ago and has since been repaired and rebuilt and repaired again until the original stones and the newer stones have blended into a single weathered surface. Ivy climbs up one section near the gate, its leaves dark green against the grey, and its stems are thick and woody where they have gripped the stone for many seasons, their tendrils finding every crack and crevice and holding fast. You have seen this wall so many times that it is as familiar to you as the walls of your own cottage, and yet it always gives you a small quiet feeling of arrival, a sense that you have reached a place where the road ends and something else begins. The gate stands open, as it always does during the daylight hours, a tall arch of darker stone set into the wall and flanked by two square towers that rise a little higher than the rampart itself. The arch is deep enough that a cart can pass through it with room to spare on either side, and its underside is blackened by the smoke of torches that have burned here on winter evenings and market mornings and the countless ordinary nights in between. The iron portcullis that can be lowered in times of trouble is raised all the way up now, its spiked teeth visible as a dark fringe at the top of the arch. And it has been so long since it was last lowered that birds have built nests in the mechanism, small dark shapes tucked into the gaps between the iron and the stone. The road passes under the arch and continues into the town, and even from where you walk you can see the cobbled surface of the street beyond, the stones worn smooth and gleaming faintly in the last of the light. The watchman leans on his halberd in the shadow of the left-hand tower, his figure so still that you might mistake him for a piece of the architecture if you did not know he was there. He is an older man with a grey beard that covers most of his face, and he wears a leather jerkin over a woolen tunic, the jerkin stained dark with age and polished at the elbows and shoulders from long use. The halberd is taller than he is, its wooden shaft worn smooth where his hands have gripped it over the years, its blade a dark crescent of iron that catches the last of the amber light, and holds it for a moment before the shadow swallows it again. He knows you, as he knows everyone who passes through this gate with any regularity, and as you draw near he shifts his weight slightly and raises one hand in a slow greeting that you return with a lift of your own hand, the hazel switch still held loosely in your fingers. He knows your uncle, the watchman says, and his voice is low and raspy in the way of someone who has spent many hours in silence and must clear his throat before speaking. Your uncle passed through the gate this morning, he tells you, heading out to the eastern fields with a cart and a pair of oxen, and he said you would be coming with the geese before nightfall. And here you are, just as he said. The watchman seems mildly pleased by this, the satisfaction of a man who likes it when the world unfolds in the way he has been told it will, and you nod and say that the road has been quiet all day, and the geese have walked well. He nods at this, the information settling into him like a stone dropping into still water. And then he steps aside and gestures with his free hand toward the open gate, a small motion that means you are welcome to pass. You herd the geese through the archway with a gentle pressure of your presence and a soft cluck of your tongue, and they funnel into the narrow space with the practiced ease of birds who have done this before. The sound of their feet changes immediately as they step off the packed earth of the road and onto the cobblestones that begin at the gate. A shift from soft thudding to a sharper clicking that echoes off the stone walls of the arch, and the towers and the buildings that line the street just beyond. The clicking is a pleasant sound, light and rhythmic, like the tapping of many small hammers on many small anvils, and it fills the enclosed space of the gate passage with a busy music that bounces back and forth between the walls before spilling out into the open air of the town. The geese seem to enjoy the sound, or at least they are not bothered by it, and they walk with their heads high and their orange feet lifting and falling in the same steady rhythm that has carried them all the way from the village. The street beyond the gate is narrow at first, squeezed between the high walls of buildings that lean slightly inward as if they are trying to hear a secret, but it widens quickly as you walk, opening into a broader way that leads toward the market square. The buildings here are made of the same grey stone as the wall, but their upper stories are half timbered, the dark wooden beams crossing and recrossing in patterns that are different on every house, some in simple squares and some in elaborate diagonals, and some in shapes that look almost like letters in an alphabet you do not know. The plaster between the beams is whitewashed or was whitewashed at some point, and even in the dimming light it glows softly against the dark wood and the grey stone, giving the street a clean and orderly appearance. A few windows are lit from within, the warm yellow glow of tallow candles pushing out through small panes of thick glass, and the light falls onto the cobbles in soft rectangles that the geese walk through one after another, their white feathers catching the glow and holding it for an instant before they pass into the shadow again. The street is quiet at this hour, most people already inside for the evening, but there are a few other figures moving through the dusk. A woman draws water from a stone well at the corner of a side lane, the creak of the windlass and the splash of the bucket reaching you as a distant sound that is already fading, and she lifts the full bucket with both hands and carries it away into a doorway that closes behind her with a soft thud. A man sits on a bench outside a workshop, his apron still on and his tools laid out on a cloth beside him, and he is cleaning something small and metallic with a rag and a pot of oil, his movements slow and methodical, the smell of the oil sharp and clean in the cooling air. He looks up as you pass, and nods once, and you nod back, and then he returns to his work, and you walk on, the geese clattering around a corner and into the square. The market square opens before you like a great stone room with the sky for a ceiling, its cobbled surface stretching away in all directions to the dark facades of the buildings that enclose it on four sides. The square is empty now. The stalls and carts and sellers all gone home, but the memory of the day's market still lingers in the scattered straw underfoot and the faint smell of vegetables and warm bread and the clean sharp scent of the horse trough that stands at the center of the square. The trough is a long rectangle of grey stone, its interior dark with water that reflects the first few stars now appearing overhead, and its sides are worn smooth where countless horses and oxen and sheep have drunk from it over many years. A thin layer of dust and chaff floats on the surface of the water, and a single feather, white and downy, drifts slowly from one end of the trough to the other, pushed by a breeze so gentle that it barely moves the air. You guide the geese toward the corner of the square that has become, through long habit, their usual resting place. It is a spot near the horse trough, but not too near, tucked against the wall of a building that houses a bakery. Its oven's cold now, but its walls still radiating a faint warmth from the day's baking. The cobbles here are slightly recessed, forming a shallow basin that collects a little straw and provides a natural enclosure for the birds, and the geese step into it with the contentment of creatures who have arrived exactly where they meant to be. They turn in slow circles, their feet shuffling against the cobbles with small clicking sounds, and then one by one they settle down, tucking their legs beneath their bodies and folding their long necks back until their bills rest among the feathers of their breasts. The old gander takes the spot closest to the wall, his back against the warm stone, and he closes his eyes with an air of great finality, his duty done for the day. The worn-backed female settles beside him, her worn spot barely visible in the dim light, and the young grey goose, its brown neck smudge now almost entirely gone, finds a hollow in the straw and nestles into it with a small wriggle of its body. You stand for a moment watching them settle, your hand resting on the hazel switch as if it were a staff rather than a drover's wand. The geese are quiet now, their constant gabble reduced to an occasional low murmur, a soft sound like water moving over stones in a stream. One of them grunts in its sleep, a small contented noise that makes you smile, and another stretches out a wing and then folds it back, the feathers making their dry rustling sound. The flock is safe, the journey is over, and you feel the weight of the day settling onto your shoulders, with a gentle pressure that is not unpleasant, the accumulated tiredness of many miles walked in quiet company. You find your own resting place against an upturned cart that stands near the geese, its shafts pointing into the air like the arms of a scarecrow. The cart is old, its wooden sides weathered to a silvery grey, and it has been in this corner of the square for as long as you can remember, serving as a seat for whoever needs one. You lower yourself onto the edge of the cart bed, your back against one of the wheels, and you stretch your legs out in front of you, your clogs resting on the cobbles with the toes pointing up toward the darkening sky. The wood of the cart is still faintly warm from the afternoon sun, and it creaks slightly as you settle into it, a sound that is more comfort than disturbance. You lay the hazel switch across your lap and let your hands rest on it, the smooth wood familiar under your fingers. The dusk is deepening around you, the last of the amber light fading from the sky and giving way to a deep blue that darkens toward purple at the zenith, and holds a thin line of pale green at the western horizon where the sun has just disappeared. The stars are coming out one by one and then in handfuls, and you can see the brightest ones even through the faint glow of the town's scattered candlelight. A planet hangs low in the east, bright and steady, and you look at it for a long time without thinking anything in particular, letting its light fall into your eyes and settle there. The air is cool now, properly cool, and you pull your shawl close around your shoulders with a small shiver that is more reflex than genuine cold. A church bell begins to toll somewhere in the town, the sound deep and slow and measured, each stroke falling through the quiet air like a stone dropped into a pool. The bell is in the tower you saw from the road, the square grey tower that rises above the rooftops, and its voice carries across the square and out over the walls and into the darkening fields beyond, marking the end of the day and the beginning of the night. You listen to the bell without counting the strokes, letting them wash over you one after another, and when the last stroke fades away, the silence that follows is deeper and richer than the silence that came before, as if the world has taken a long, slow breath and let it out again. The town settles into the dark blue twilight around you, its sounds growing softer and more scattered as the evening progresses. A door closes somewhere in a nearby street, the latch falling into place with a distant clack. A voice calls out once and is answered by another voice, the words indistinct but the tone calm and unhurried. A dog barks 3 times and then stops, and the silence rushes back in to fill the space the barking left. The geese sleep on, their bodies pale mounds in the dimness, and the horse trough reflects the stars in its dark water, the reflections trembling slightly with every small movement of the air. You sit against the upturned cart for a long time, not ready yet to rise and find your uncle and return to the cottage, not ready to break the spell of the quiet square and the sleeping geese and the cool evening air. The journey is complete, the road has been walked, and all that remains is to carry the memory of it into the night and into the days that will follow. You close your eyes and listen to the soft breathing of the geese and the distant murmur of the town, and you let the stillness of the evening settle over you like a blanket, warm and heavy and full of peace. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the planets hold their steady course, and the world turns towards sleep, one quiet moment at a time,